By Keith Lee of some of the numbers. Anybody who'd like to take a break at this time, you're welcome to leave, but we're going to continue on.
An ordinance adopting a budget for the fiscal year 2012 for each fund of the City of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to Article 6, Chapter 6 of the Charter of the City, beginning July 1, 2011, and ending June 30, 2012, appropriating the amounts shown in each budget as expenditures, adopting the item of anticipated funding sources, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures from exceeding actual funding sources, and amending the Code of Ordinances to effectuate such adoption. Whereas a proposed budget for each of the various funds of the city has been presented to the Mayor and City Council, and whereas appropriate advertised public hearings have been held on the proposed budget as required by law and regulations, whereas the Mayor and City Council have reviewed the proposed budget and have made certain amendments to funding sources or appropriations, and whereas each of the funds has a balanced budget such that anticipated funding sources equal or exceed proposed expenditures. Now, therefore, the Mayor and City of Roswell, pursuant to their authority, do hereby adopt the following ordinance. The City of Roswell, Georgia, hereby adopts an expenditure budget for fiscal year 2012, said budget being described below and shown on Schedule A for each fund of the City of Roswell, Georgia. 100, General Fund, $56,604,793. 210, Confiscated Assets Fund, $715,588. 215, E911 Fund, $1,621,355. 230, Impact Fee Fund, $824,477. 235, Cemetery Fund, $23,500. 275, Hotel Motel Fund, $826,587. 290, Lita Thompson Rental Fund, $63,192. 350, Capital Projects Fund, $4,270,652. 410, Debt Service Fund, $6,699,933. 505, Water Sewer Fund, $3,456,884. 507, Stormwater Fund, $2,516,828. 540, Solid Waste Fund, $9,801,368. 555, Recreation Participation Fund, $4,624,468. 601, Workers' Compensation Fund, $446,331. 602, Group Benefit Fund, $6,844,870. 603, Risk and Liability Fund, $863,393. Total use of funds by fund, $100,204,219. A millage rate of 5.455 mils is hereby established as part of the approved budget based on the estimated digest of Fulton County. The millage rate has a component of 4.059 for the general fund and a 1.396 component for the general obligation bond debt fund. This millage rate may be adjusted at a future date based on receipt of a certified digest. This budget fixes the number of budgeted full-time positions of the city at 602. This number may only be increased or decreased through approval of the Mayor and City Council. The City Administrator or his/her designee is authorized to create policies and procedures for the number, pay grade, classification, and or cost center location, which may be changed throughout the year. Mayor and Council further also adopt a capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2012 through 2016 as attached hereto, incorporated herein as Schedule B. This plan does not indicate any promise of appropriations for future years. This plan may only be modified through action of Mayor and City Council. Mayor and Council further approve the reappropriation of all capital projects listed in Schedule C. This is a listing of currently appropriated capital projects which will be reappropriated as of July 1, 2011 with the passage of this ordinance. The City Administrator and his/her designee may promulgate all necessary internal rules, regulations, and policies to ensure that this budget ordinance is followed.
Stelzy, is it fair to say that budget as read includes the elimination of the $500,000 rollback, so it's a continuation of last year's millage rate? As read, it's amended by council to eliminate the rollback.
Correct.
Mr. Lee, would you present the revenues and expenditures that are anticipated in this budget?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor, Council. Tonight's presentation will be over the second reading of the proposed budget. We have 4 topics that I'll try to cover before getting into the discussions. We'll reiterate the budget principles, go over what occurred at the first reading, summarize the general fund revenues and expenditures, as well as the all funds revenues and expenditures. In terms of the budget principles guiding the creation of this budget, a balanced budget is revenues greater than or equal to operating expenditures plus maintenance capital. General fund use of reserves for one-time capital and road resurfacing and reconstruction. No tax increase. Maintain general fund balance greater than or equal to 3 months operating expenditures, and maintain current level of service. In terms of what was proposed for the FY12 budget, the general fund at first reading was $56,676,339 for revenues and $56,104,793 for expenditures. All funds were $1,174,841 for revenue, $99,204,219 for expenditures. The millage rate was proposed at 5.345, which was a 0.11 decrease from FY11. The general fund balance was projected at $26.288 million, which is above policy limits. At first reading, some changes were proposed and approved by the council. The millage rate was adjusted to 5.455 to be consistent with FY11 numbers. That's 4.059 on the M&O and 1.396 for debt. Results in $500,000 in revenue. That $500,000 was allocated to road resurfacing and reconstruction, which accounts for the $1 million. To provide the history of our millage, we started at 6.087 in FY06 and at 5.455 for last year and this year, based on the current ordinance. To provide where we are in revenues, this is a summary list of the revenues in the general fund, broken down by category. In FY11, our budget was $55.9 million. For the proposed FY12, it was $56.676 million, which was a $760,000 increase. First reading increased that by $500,000. The revenue is $57,176,339 for the general fund. To break that down from a percentage standpoint, property tax is 34% of our revenues for the general fund. Sales tax is 33%. Franchise alcohol business is 21%, and fines and forfeitures are 5%. For the expenditure budget, we had FY11 for $64,062,000. The proposed FY12 was $56,104,000. It's primarily a reduction due to one-time capital. At the first reading, we allocated $500,000 for road resurfacing. The new expenditure budget is $56,604,793. To break that down by department, this gives you the total expenditure by department. Police being our largest at $15,961,322. And environmental public works being the smallest impact to the general fund at $1,654,217. In terms of balancing the general fund budget, we have $57,176,339 for revenues and $56,604,793 for expenditures. Revenues exceed expenditures by $571,546. For all funds, the all funds new budget is $101,174,841. There are 2 items that are highlighted or italicized and underlined. One being property tax, that is $25,625 million. and then transfers in of $4,990,000. Those are both up $500,000. In terms of the proposed expenditure budget, it's $100,204,219. The capital budget is up by $500,000 to $6,906,000, and the transfers are up by $500,000 as well for $13,857,000. In terms of employees, we are at 602 for the year based on the current proposed budget. And this is the second reading of the budget ordinance.
Does the council have any questions about budget presentation? I've got a couple of questions. Now, if you'll turn back to the projected revenues, what did we base our estimate of property taxes upon, our property tax revenues?
Property taxes are based on a declining digest of about 2%.
Let's go to the rec participation fund. Do you have that somewhere in your slides?
Yes, sir.
Now, do we anticipate a continuing a subsidy in this current budget as proposed?
Yes, sir, we do.
How much of a subsidy are we proposed? Does my budget propose to the rec participation fee?
$479,445.
Now, that is for the supervision and of the participation.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Now, in addition to that $479,000, do we include in the rec participation fee the maintenance of the fields?
No, sir.
Do we include the maintenance of the gym or the fixing of the roof or the turning on the lights?
No, sir.
So in addition to $479,000 for the rec participation subsidy, there is also, we're providing them with the facility at no charge.
I'm not sure about no charge, but we
We're
provide the
not
facilities.
including that in the rec participation fee.
We maintain the facilities in the general fund.
In the general fund. So as far as what we're furnishing for the rec programs, we're furnishing them with a field and maintenance of those fields. And on top of that, the budget proposes a $479,000 subsidy to those programs.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Does the budget set the rec fees?
No, sir.
Does the council have any other questions? Yes, Councilmember Price.
Can you explain the indirect charge elimination? Or can somebody?
For rec participation fund.
Right. I mean, there are some, I guess you would say, offsets to this loss. At what percent does that cover or make up?
Maybe I'm not. In terms of what the indirect costs are, or what are they covering, I'm not sure I'm following.
Can you explain the red ink there and how that offsets the previous subsidy that's now missing?
Okay. Prior to this fiscal year, or the FY12 proposed budget, all of our enterprise funds, including the rec participation fund, paid for the management of that fund that was subsidized by the general fund, meaning the operations that are in finance, the operations that are the management of the city, that have some oversight of the enterprise fund. That cost to the rec participation fund was $205,499. As part of the proposed budget, the mayor proposed not to have that indirect cost charged to the rec participation fund. Therefore, their expenditure was reduced by $205,000. They are not paying the general fund for the management or the oversight of that program. For things such as purchasing or running payroll or dealing with complaints.
So is that essentially a gain for the department budget?
The department expenditure budget was reduced by $205,000. The offset of that was the general fund revenue was reduced by that same amount.
So it's identical?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Does the council have any other questions? I'm going to entertain motions as to the second reading of this budget and discussion by council. After I entertain motions and any discussion council wants to make of those proposals, I'm going to open it up for the public for public comment. But I wanted to get the motions on the floor so the public would know what this council is considering as to the second reading before we entertain it up for public comment. And once we have the motions, public comment, we'll have a final discussion by council as to those motions. If there are further amendments, I'll open it back up to the public for further comment. And once we've gotten all the amendments and all the opportunity for the public to comment on those amendments and the council to comment on those amendments, we'll be taking a vote on the amendments. So do we have a motion? Councilman Orleans.
Yes, excuse me. I'd like to make a motion for the adoption of the second reading of the FY 2012 budget with the changes as presented on add-delete list as of last Friday, which include funding the assistant police chief position, adding operating contingency, funding our pension plan transition cost, adding 2 911 dispatchers to the 911 center, covering the city's cost of stormwater maintenance, elimination of operating and capital for videotaping of meetings, elimination of increase to city-sponsored events, leaving it at the same level it was at, an increase to road resurfacing of $347,000 for a new total for all funds of $103,307,794,000 and all accounting entries to accomplish and affect the budget. And I just wanted to mention Mr. Campbell had the question, and I think it was covered in this video that Keith put up, but the 0.11 millage was moved over to road resurfacing, and then we're adding $347,000 in this motion that I just made for a total of $847,000 in road resurfacing. So that is the motion.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Nguyen. Is there any additional motions? Councilmember Eichelhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have an additional amendment based on the amount that goes to the Recreation Participation Fund. And frankly, there are just a lot of numbers involved with this program, and we've had a lot of time spent trying to figure out how much goes to what. And a number of staff on the department have worked really hard on trying to come up with that. Several worked over weekends to do that, and appreciate all the work that went into that. Having said that, there's still, given our system that we're working with, difficulties in determining what goes where and how much is what and how much things go up and down. And if the fees go up a certain amount, the participation is decreased by a certain amount. It's just very difficult to make any kind of blanket statement. But I think the general feeling is that, as certainly when we increased the fees 15% a couple of years ago, the participation rates did drop. But because there's so much uncertainty in that, I am concerned about the impact that an increase in fees would have right now. So I'm going to come back to that motion in 1 second. But we are trying to schedule a meeting between the Recreation Commission and the Council to discuss the Recreation Participation Fund, the overall question of how much should be subsidized, whether it should, how much it should, and then any increases that may need to happen this year and or future years. And so I'm going to suggest that we hold off on any reductions in the participation fund until we have that meeting, and it may come later in this next fiscal year that we do decide to make an increase, or may not. That's yet to be determined. But I would like to move that we restore the $179,000 that is currently reduced from or taken out of the Rec Participation Fund from the general fund. And that would come specifically from that extra money that is now going into the road resurfacing. So 179 out of that, and then the 179 for road resurfacing, because we must have that, would have to come out of our reserves as the rest of the funding is for road resurfacing. So does that make sense? That
Mr. Eichelhart, let me see if I can understand the motion. Your motion is to reduce, Mr. Orland's proposed increasing road resurfacing by $347,000. And you're proposing to reduce the amount of road resurfacing by $179,000 and increase the rec participation subsidy by $179,000.
That's correct. And then ultimately, during this next fiscal year, that may change some, and we'll determine that at its future point. So this is not finally decided, but
well, for this budget, it would be
for tonight, it certainly is. Yes.
The council can choose to amend the budget at mid-year or any point in time, but for tonight, it would be
That is correct.
You're asking to continue that to increase the subsidy from $400-something thousand to about $500-something thousand.
Correct, or whatever that number is.
By $179,000.
Right.
All right, is there a second? Second by Councilmember Diamond. All right, that's, any other motions?
Just one clarification, we're not dealing with capital at this point, right? So
No, sir, this is a motion. If there's a motion to add capital to this budget, that would be another motion.
but we're waiting for that one, right?
Well, after this settled, that would be another separate motion.
Right, so I'll hold off on that.
Well, we're going to, if the council wishes to go through the discussion of the operating budget and then have a later discussion, what I want to do is do you wish to pass the operating budget and then discuss the capital budget as a separate item? All right, we can do that. So, any other amendments to the operating budget? This is the budget being funded by general fund. Councilmember Price.
I would just like to, I'm not sure whether procedurally it's amend the amendment or
Got another amendment.
It's just be
Whatever.
another motion and tell us what you want to amend.
I think it's an amendment to the amendment, but
Yes,
we've already-
it would be. We have a motion and an amendment to the motion, and this would be another amendment to the motion. And we'll be taking in reverse.
Well, it's
order.
amendment to the amendment, but anyway.
Just
all right.
make your motion. We'll figure it out.
Okay, from the add-delete list, I would move that we restore both the first two items in order to allow people at home, what have you, to view the council meetings. So the proposed amendment to delete that, I would want to amend to delete the deletion.
That would add in $18,000 for video cameras and $12,000 for the operating cost of that program.
Correct. And the next item would be on the special events.
Let's take that as a motion because
Right.
these are two separate items. You may get two different opinions. There's a motion to add in videotaping of mayor and council meetings and playing them back online for the citizens. Is there a second? Motion fails for the lack of a second.
The next item is the to amend the amendment of deleting the proposed budget's increase of $10,000, and in lieu of that, to restore the $10,000 that was taken away plus add $10,000, which brings the total special events budget to $75,000. And I think we have a good reason to do that. One, we heard earlier a recommendation and a request for us to put it up to $100,000. I've also heard that amount mentioned by staff. I've also had a number of people say to me that they think special events, especially multiple day events, are a huge economic boost for the city. And there are a number of people who would like to create new, I won't say programs, but event-type activities in the city that will draw people here and increase to our visibility in the region and just overall improve the quality of life here. So I think that in our committee meetings, we spend an inordinate amount of time haggling over small amounts of money. We actually went over budget this year, and that was regrettable. We did have to turn away some people as far as the sponsorship that we would have offered to them. So I think to be on the safe side, restoring that and adding to it would have us in a much better shape next year. So my motion is to amend the second reading to add 10,000.
Well, would you be going from 55, from 60, Mr. Orleans is asking to reduce it to 55, you're asking to increase it to 75.
The final number to be 75, yes.
75, and I presume that money would be coming out of this operating contingency. There's $150,000 which hasn't been programmed.
Correct.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Yes, question.
I have a question about the motion. The 65, does that include the Chattahoochee Nature Center? That's part of that? If it was 55 plus 10, is that where we got the 65?
The 55 is similar to what was budgeted last year and
Right.
includes the Chattahoochee Nature Center, I believe.
Sure.
As I understand, nothing has changed except the proposed budget
Kay, can
was
you comment
10,000
on that?
more, which was reduced by somebody who's yet identified.
Just for clarification, this is not an allocation of the 55, 65, or 75. It is setting a budget for all of these programs. We would later determine how that was spent. Is that an accurate statement?
I want to clarify where we were last year, because I thought it was
And let's get a
55
clarification.
plus.
How much money did we spend, or have we spent this year in this category?
The approved budget's 55,000.
Not how much we approved, how much have we spent, and I think we've,
Putting it up.
my understanding, we spent more than that.
I did.
Yeah, so the Nature Center is separate from the 55. So the 65 you're proposing includes the Nature Center. No.
The Nature Center is the top line.
Right.
So the question was, how much money did we approve to spend this year? Not what we approved in the initial budget, but how much we end up spending.
This would approximate 60,000.
So this year we spent 60,000.
Yeah, we went over budget.
Well, we're 5,000 over, but then the Chattahoochee Nature Center is 4,500 left, so it's like $500.
That's correct. The Chattahoochee Nature Center does not spend all of theirs. You're correct. It would
So
be
they spent less than was appropriated. So we
Correct.
spent 55.5 this year.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
There is one event that has not occurred yet. I think the River Run for Hope, we haven't calculated those final costs, so that could be adjusted some. So I think it's fair to say we're very close to the $55,000 budgeted that we will budget and spend in fiscal year 2011.
Thank you.
So this amendment adds 20,000. Okay.
Now, it hasn't been, it would be budgeted, it would be up to the council of whether or not to appropriate and spend on specific projects. Councilmember DiPolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As far as setting priorities for these, we have had discussions about making sure that local events receive priority. Did we fund all of the local events that came forward last year? For this current fiscal year?
Well, there were some folks who asked for funding that did not receive it, but most of them were funded.
But as far as local, I think all of the local ones were funded. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the
I think if they were
55,
locally based charity, I think they were all funded.
right, so 55 would get our local events funded. Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Eichelhardt.
I think the points about having an economic development aspect and bringing people to Roswell are valid, and it's something that we need to look at. But we are working on an economic development plan, and I think this needs to be considered in light of that. I'm uncomfortable just putting more money for something, and perhaps during the year we do come back and add more. But I'm comfortable with this where it is, so I won't second that change.
So we have a motion. Is there a second? Councilmember Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a long conversation with Eric Rodwell this afternoon about this. And
Point of order, a parliamentary inquiry. Mr. Mayor, are we discussing this issue without a second, or?
Yes, we are.
Well, is that allowed?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Again, I was discussing this with Mr. Broadwell this afternoon, and I do agree with him that we do need to look at the economic impact of any type of event that comes here. But again, that is not part of the special events budget. The special events budget is for our local nonprofits to come in to do fundraising, and it does help with the police, the transportation, the public works. And I agree with Councilman Eichelhart that since we do have a strategic economic development steering committee that's being formed, is hopefully going to start 1st of July, this would be a component of that committee to see how we can integrate economic development, i.e. Special events, within our economic plan. So I'm comfortable with the $55,000.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Motion fails for the lack of a second. Any additional motions?
Question.
Yes.
Since in the wisdom of this add-delete list, again, it's unattributed, so I don't know who specifically wants the budget to be less, but if that person would like to step forward and say why they want the budget to be less, my understanding is that this would also compromise the bicycle event. Does anyone want to address that, since we're discussing things without motions or seconds?
Councilmember Orleans.
I don't think it was meant to address any one item, as the mayor had said earlier. It's just in keeping consistent budget and what was last year going into for the next year.
Any further amendments? All right. We have a motion by Councilman Orleans. We have a amendment proposed by Councilmember Eichelhart. And was there another amendment? All right. Not that passed. All right. We have Councilmember Orland's motion, and which we've got which is on the screen, and Councilmember Eichelhart's motion to restore the subsidy back to $500 and something thousand, up from $450,000 thereabouts. Any other motions? Any further discussion before I open this up for comments from the floor? Councilmember Diamond.
I would like to comment on the videotaping of the mayor and council meetings. I'm actually a proponent of that concept. I just would like to see us look at how we're going to do it before we pay staff and multiple cameras to do it. I'm hopeful that we can find an alternative, and I think there's some policy decisions that would need to be made before we get to that point about how the meetings are going to go. And
Mr. Mayor, point of order. We have discussed this item. There was no second to that motion. Councilmember Diamond should not be discussing it at this point.
I will give Councilmember Diamond an opportunity to discuss it, and any other council members opportunity to discuss this. And if
somebody would just like to second the motion, it'd be lovely.
I understand your position. If the council members wish to respond at this time or at a later time, or public, or we'll hear from them. Councilmember Diamond.
I'm good.
Okay. Any further discussion before I open up the operating budget amendments for discussion by the public? This time we'll hear from the public. Anyone wish to be heard? Yes, sir, come forward.
Lee Fleck, Martin's Landing. I think after the open mic session, there's a lot of comment about fees, recreational fees, and Mayor and the rest of this council, you all started backstroking on increasing the subsidy. What I want the people here to see and understand is the reality of the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is 2011 staffing. Right there is Parks and Recreation. You had 107, and it was reduced to 88. 19 employees were moved out of the general fund to the participatory recreation department. And this city transferred over $1 million out of the general fund into the recreation participatory program. They subsidized $1 million last year, so the fees weren't increased. This year they're going to give you $479,000. Now that's the reality of what you're looking at. I say stop it. What was agreed 2 years ago was that, and I know from talking to coaches, and I was involved in this process of being elected, that there were grave concerns about the fact that participatory funds were going to support salaries. There is the evidence of what has happened, and it will continue to happen. I have some other questions. Since we're talking about the special events account, I want you all to recognize that we send $65,000 here. I'm talking 55, 65, 75. Here it is for the proposed 2012, 65. Last year, it was 55. But there's nothing for any previous year. Where did $55,000 show up all of a sudden? Well, the truth of the matter is, in 2010, there was $40,000 that was spent for special events, but it was conveniently hidden in the general accounts fund under supplies. The year prior to that, $38,000 was funded the same way. The year prior to that, $30,000 was funded by local businesses. Now, I contend that people who are physically able to support themselves should do so. And that's why I oppose increasing special events fund year after year after year. We have gone in 2 years, in 3 years, we have doubled that account. Meanwhile, fees are going up for our kids, for sports and recreation. This is adult recreation. This is children's recreation. I support this, not this. Now, I have some other questions of this budget. First of all, I want to compliment you all for putting $2 million in for vehicles. Unlike last year where you had to use capital to the tune of $2 million to buy police cars, when it should have been budgeted. So I'm glad to see you're actually putting budgetary dollars back in to replace vehicles. Now, this number has me gravely concerned. This is the water and sewage expenditures. It's the amount of money we pay Fulton County to buy water to subsidize our water plant. You'll notice it was $600,000 last year. It spiked to $1 million, and it was only budgeted at $800,000 last year, which is where they're going again this year. What that tells me is based on the rate per 1,000 gallons that we pay Fulton County, that in essence we bought more water from Fulton County than we made on our own water plant. I'll rest there. I don't understand why we had a $200,000 spike last year. Was the water plant down for any period of time? Or is this just increased consumption? I would expect that answer to be questioned tonight, or that question to be answered tonight. The other thing, I would like a little clarification on what this indirect cost is. Is this G&A, like general administrative cost? I'd like that explained more fully. Indirect cost, $1.5 million. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to call, is Mr. Mooring here? Mr. Mooring, could you address the question regarding the $650,000 to approximately $1 million in the water fund.
Mr. Mayor, the budgeted amount is $700,000. Our estimated expenditure is $700,000. I don't understand. I don't know what Mr. Fleck was looking at, but I'll certainly be glad to get with him and review that. But
so it's not 650 to $100 million. It's 750, 750.
700 even.
700. K-Law, maybe you can help us out.
I can. I think Mr. Fleck is looking across all funds as part of our budget document, which is on page 45. And actually, there is the difference that he indicated. That is across all funds.
Right. Okay. Thank you. What Mr. Fleck is looking at here is citywide expenditures. So that would be all of the water expenses at fire stations, at rec facilities. So some of that is purchased from city supplies, and some is purchased from Fulton County. So that's a whole different ballgame. And Fulton County rates went up.
What was the reason for the increase from year to year?
I don't know. I mean, it would be individual accounts that would consider. I do know that Fulton County had an increase of rates, but I assume that much of an increase, it would have also been an increase in consumption.
Increase in consumption.
That's my guess. I don't know.
Love, did you want to respond?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Part of that was in previous years we had budgeted amounts, estimates in departments, and instead of doing budget transfers at the end of the year, we just used money from other line items. In preparing the budget for 2011, we righted those amounts, looked back at what had actually been spent based on all of those factors, and then budgeted more appropriately. So it's not so much that the bottom line went up that much, but the combination of line items within the operating budget. So that was just shoring that up and having a more accurate dollar amount budgeted for that utility.
Thank you. Mr. Fleck also questioned the indirect cost of $1.5 million. Ms. Love, can you respond to that?
Yes, sir. Across all funds, all the enterprise funds for FY 2011 pay back to the general fund. Mr. Fleck, I apologize, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to as G&A, but for the city of Roswell, we recoup costs that are administrative and overhead in nature, so payroll, administration, computers, fleet.
That's G&A.
Yes, sir.
Who'd like to speak next? Yes, come forward, please.
Oh, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Ms.
Could we get a clarification for a question that Mr. Fleck had regarding the special events budgets? What exactly the city is? I mean, I'm not sure it's clear to everybody what we do for that amount of money if somebody wants to have a special event. I mean, we're not printing their brochures or doing this, that, or the other. The actual costs primarily are going to police.
Ms. Love will explain how we come up with the expenditures on special events.
Yes, sir. The majority of it is the salaries associated, or wages and salaries associated with the city's role in transportation or public works, recreation, and parks. It's setting up the venue, the area. It might be the road closure cost. It could be cones, barricades, some limited supplies, and that is charged out. It's paid out and then charged back to that event. Speaking to the issue, Mr. Fleck, you noted that in some previous years there had been a zero budget for that. It's not that it was a zero budget. That was paid for other lines, and the supplies was one, but it was also across salaries. And then the mayor determined that it would be more appropriate from an accounting standpoint for us to be able to show what had been spent for special events across the city. Therefore, we began budgeting it on that specific line item. Every month at the Community Development and Transportation Committee, the committee as a whole determines what events the city will sponsor or co-sponsor. Each event is approved event by event. So moving through the year, there's a very transparent record of what that looks like. This budget is just the guesstimate or estimate of what we work within, and then it's up to the committee to decide about the individual events as we move through the fiscal year.
Thank you. Yes, sir. I apologize for the interruption.
Ernest Campbell, 545 Creekwood Crossing, Terremont Subdivision. Councilman Orland's mentioned that, in answer to my question, that $300,000+ are going to go to road resurfacing, I believe. It's what you would call, I didn't follow all the amending that was going on, but does the city maintain a list of shovel-ready resurfacing projects? Are you then suggesting that that money would be used to accelerate that, or are you suggesting that money would entertain new unknown things at this point?
First off, the 0.11 millage rate you were talking about was $500,000, and that was put into road resurfacing at the first reading. This was an additional $347,000 to go into road resurfacing, giving, until any action takes place, giving a total of $847,000 in next year's budget for road resurfacing. We have a 20 to 22 year program of resurfacing our roads and keeping them up to date. In order to do that, we need to budget approximately $2 million a year for road resurfacing. So as of this point in time in the operations budget, we only have a total of $847,000. So we still need to, and it will be addressed later in our capital budget, we still need to make up additional money to get to that $2 million level for road resurfacing. But this is based on a schedule that we already have, and we already know the condition of the roads, and we know which roads are going to be done in the next year.
So, essentially, you would be accelerating, with this extra money, you'd be accelerating production of that list.
No, we're just trying to keep up with that list, if we have $2 million.
Well, I guess my point being is if you didn't have the money, you wouldn't be doing it.
If we didn't have the money, we wouldn't be doing a lot of things, right?
Right. So the extra $500,000 buys you further down the list.
Well, it helps us trying to get to that maintenance of $2 million a year.
If I had it, I'd give it to you. But my point being is it just gets you down the list. We'd like to be further down the list. I know a couple of potholes that I could recommend filling, but we'd like to be further down the list. I was just trying to find out, when I said articulate, that's what I was trying to find out, if we maintain a list. As opposed to, wow, dude, we're going to throw this money in a big bucket and see what we do with it later.
No.
That was the difference that I was asking. As far as I hear everybody about the Parks and Recreation, which I'm in favor of, but one of the things I've noticed is the increase in the cost of these things has to do with the increased cost of providing these things. That people don't work for $5,000 a year anymore. I was astonished when my sister told me that my niece was joining the volleyball club, and she had to write, this is volleyball, she had to write a $1,500 check. And I thought my entire cost of playing baseball all through high school was $3 for a bat and $7 for a glove. Now, things change, but not $1,500 worth. So the idea that we have a lot of supplementing, that we're cutting, that one thing or another, I think we also have to look to see where those increased expenses are coming from. And I have left parts of my body on recreation parks all over the Southeast, so I'm all in favor of it, but at the same time, I'm not sure we got the money for all of it. So anyway, my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, come forward.
Let me go ahead. None of our board members are paid anything on that board. So somebody made mention a while ago the board members wouldn't run it for nothing. The only paid people on the swim team are the young coaches. And the head coach makes the most, and she's not going to kick down $1,500 for the season. Neighborhoods, $7,000 or $8,000. Now, your younger coaches, I think they work for minimum wage. And they've always paid the coaches. So we're not pulling a lot out of what the swim team puts in with salaries. I mean, you get with that $1,500, you get a 5-time All-American and a college scholarship doing your coaching. That's pretty good. But we're not taking a lot out of it. And
We appreciate that.
Well, thank y'all too.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak? Yes, come forward, please. I'll get you next.
My name is Jennifer Heilman, and I live at 910 Brookfield Parkway in Brookfield Country Club, and I am a member of the lacrosse community. And since it was brought up tonight, two things, both the special events budget as well as the Park and Recs Department issues, I wanted to just go on record to make it clear that the Roswell Youth Lacrosse Invitational that we have created over 8 years, purely through volunteers, is solely funded by the RYLA. We pay for the police, we pay for the fields, we pay for the park staff, that's staff over Mother's Day weekend. We provide the foremost successful youth lacrosse invitational over Mother's Day weekend with 1,200 hours of volunteers, 120 teams, 7,000 people each day in the Roswell area parks, and it is 100% funded by us. We pay the city to give the city the gift of the economic impact. So I don't want anything misconstrued that the numbers that are being discussed regarding the special events are taken from the youth rec program, because they're not. And it is an extremely, extremely successful program that we are proud of, and something that we welcome continuing to give it back to the city. So thank you.
Thank you, and we do appreciate the Roswell Lacrosse League's tournament. Yes, sir, come forward.
My name is Frank Padilla. I'm from 605 Sailwind Drive, which is in the North Pond subdivision of Martin's Landing. I have 2 points I'd just like to be cleared up. If I understand correctly, the amendment to the motion allowed the budget for the recreations to go back, I think, $175,000 to the original amount of last year's. And based on that, is that the committee, the budget committee, would meet with the committee to determine the fees for the recreation organization?
No, sir. This council will not be setting fees for the rec department.
But they will meet with a committee from the rec department which will determine the fees.
If the council wishes to, they can meet after this budget hearing to discuss those fees and discuss the subsidy.
The money has been put back into the budget.
There's a motion to put the money to restore the subsidy from about $450,000 to about $500-something thousand. Okay. There's a motion to restore, to increase the amount of the subsidy from what it was as originally proposed in my budget.
Okay, so that gives them the option, which they may or may not follow, to not increase the fees if they...
That's correct. There's been the motion is not to set the fees. The motion is to increase the subsidy from the proposed budget.
Thank you. My second question was, and I understand this is the operation budget. Will all the money for fire station number 4 be considered in the capital budget, or I see no money allocated in the operating budget for the new fire station.
We're not anticipating the new fire station being completed within the next 12 months. So it would not, and even if it were, we would simply transfer the operating budget from the existing fire station to the new fire station. So we're not anticipating a increase in operating costs right now.
True, but is that going to be considered in the capital budget?
That's if this council wishes to consider it after we have passed an operating budget, that's up to them.
Then my last remark would be is that with all the publications we had on fire station number 4, the public meetings, the newspaper articles, and all the public attention to it, I think it's that the council should address that and make a decision on where that fire station goes without delaying it into future years. And that's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Hello again, Mike Knighton, 580 Indigo in Roswell. I was wondering if somebody could fill me in on the reason for eliminating the $30,000 for the cameras and the operating expense to televise city council meetings.
Does any council member wish to respond? Councilman Orleans.
Mr. Knighton, I'm sure other council members may have other reasoning. I can't speak for everybody. But some of the thought processes, we haven't addressed the issue of how the meetings are even going to be handled in order to go to taping them. For example, in Roswell, we've always been very generous of people coming in and speaking for however long they want. You know, my opinion has been if they take the time to come down here to City Hall, that they should have whatever time they need to convey their ideas to us. If we start taping and going into producing the meetings and putting them online, we need to address that issue, whether we put 3-minute time limits on them, how it's going to be done, if a topic will have a time limit, similar to what our Planning Commission does now. So there's just a lot of issues that need to be addressed before we start putting money set up for it.
And my understanding inherent in the answer, you don't think those issues can be overcome in a year?
You never know with 6 different people and their opinions, or 7.
So we're going to eliminate it from the... I'm here because I think that helps with transparency in government. And it seems to me like whatever issues that you just described, we ought to be able to work them out. You all ought to be able to work them out and provide greater transparency to our citizens.
Mr. Knighton, I agree with you. Mr. Eigelhart is suggesting we increase our subsidy by $179,000 to work it out with our rec commission later, without having any real decision on that. For $30,000, I think we can address those issues. Before we would implement the program, we would have to approve a contract for videotaping. To buy those cameras, we would have to have some other discussions. It's not self-implementing. And I would hope the council will reconsider putting that money back in, because I think we have great meetings. I think they're interesting. And I think Councilmember Eigelhart and looks good on camera. Councilmember Diamond.
I'll give this one more shot. We have a camera right there, and I know they're not going to love me downstairs, but that camera can go on a wide shot and shoot the council meeting for no money. We don't have to pay somebody to edit. As soon as you put 2 cameras, you've increased the cost exponentially, because now you're talking about hourly people to edit it, and it just changes the whole picture of it. So I understand there's an air conditioner back there. We've looked at all kinds of things, things wobble and all that, but I don't know that we need the up close and personal of all of us so much as we need to cover the subject. And if I'm not mistaken, you can go online and listen to all the council meetings now. But as far as spending a lot more money to put it on camera, we have cameras. We just have to decide how we're going to use them. And to spend extra money to televise, I'm not against televising them within the parameters. I just don't know that we need to spend money to do it. And that hasn't been demonstrated to me yet. As much as I love the people involved and they do a great job on other things, that's just not something I don't see the money in it yet.
I'd like to call on our community information officer to tell us why she's recommending this. We believe need 2 cameras and we need $12,000 operating expenses if we're going to go online. She's the one. Ms. Diamond, I went to her and said, "Can't we televise now?" And she said, "No, we have to
Julie
to do
wants
that.
us to
we
have
need
a
2
quality
cameras."
level, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the quality that she's looking
Now,
for.
if the council wants to go ahead and televise it with our existing cameras, I can support that too.
Part of our
And
issue...
I would entertain a motion to just televise it with the existing cameras if that's what this council wants to do. I think our Alpharetta's online, the other cities are online. I think the citizens listening to something without video is not the way it works these days. I don't think we're going to get anybody to listen to it, but I think if we go online with some folks, some video, we'll have a lot more people participating in these meetings online. And if you'll tell us why you're recommending this in the budget.
The main issue is a staffing issue. We don't have the amount of staff in the office to actually operate the cameras. When we turn them on...
That was the $12,000.
Yes, sir. When we turn them on, we need a staff person in that back booth to run them. And we're talking about doing every regular council meeting. And we only have one person. So if that person is on vacation or that person is sick, so that's where the contract comes to supplement that.
That's $12,000 for
Yes,
a
sir.
part-time person.
The additional cameras, we have issues with the shaking, and so everything is out of focus because of the air conditioning handling units in this room. And so we wanted to get cameras that would alleviate that issue, and there are cameras. These were placed in here years and years ago, and the new technology would help us with the vibrations, which causes the picture to be blurry.
Thank you for that explanation. Does anyone else wish to comment? Councilmember Price, you wish to add to that?
Only I just wanted to make a motion that we, in some way, shape, or form, televise council meetings.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to hear from the public.
There's no fiscal note there.
We're going to hear from the public, and any additional motions this council wishes to make regarding the budget, we'll entertain those after we hear from the public, because hopefully, and maybe, we'll learn something from them. So I'll entertain motions after I hear from the public. Does anyone else wish to comment? I see no hands up. Closing public hearing. Mrs. Price, if you wish to make another stab at a motion, you may.
I just think that since we're a policy-setting body, that we've kind of, I think, stalled on this for a long time, and I get a lot of requests from citizens that they'd like to be able to see us. And I know that there's the issues, as Councilmember Orland's pointed out, that there may be grandstanding. I think in some cases it may actually make people more succinct, but if we did actually impose some time limits, it might not be onerous or unwieldy to proceed in that fashion. But I think we've been reluctant to take a stand to go forward and do it, and I would just like to make a motion that we proceed to televising council meetings and set into motion the policies and procedures thereof, and at some point, if not tonight, entertain what type of equipment we would use and person to man it.
Let me see if I've got this straight. Is there any dollar amount connected with this motion?
That motion, no, just to set the policy that we will do it, and then I think we can address it as a line item because it's an add-delete item. We'll get to that in a minute.
So there is a motion to do it without a dollar amount connected. It might be helpful, given that we're in a budget hearing. Let me get back to community information. Would it be possible to televise with a shaky camera for $12,000? Another $12,000 without the $18,000 in camera?
Yes, it is possible to broadcast with $12,000 with a shaky camera.
If that gets us moving in that direction, Yes, shaky camera and one person to operate it. Let's start there.
So is your motion to add $12,000 to the budget to the part-time help to help with the televising camera meetings with the existing equipment?
Well, seeing as it's an add delete item, we're going to vote on those one at a time, aren't we?
We'll be voting on each motion one at a time. This would, if you get a second, this would be a separate motion.
I guess I better move that then.
Well, just so I clear up, is your motion?
Yes.
Let me just clear it up here. Is your motion to add $12,000 to the budget to add a part-time person to televised council meetings?
Yes.
Is there a second? Fails to pass for lack of a second. All right. Any additional motions before we have discussion regarding the amendment to the budget? Any additional motions? Hearing no additional motions, I'll open it up for discussion of the first of Councilmember Eichelhardt's motion to restore $179,000 to the rec budget. Does anyone wish to comment on that? Seeing no hands up, I will make my comment, gentlemen. This council first does not set rec fees, and I'm not suggesting we set rec fees. This council does not set policy whether Booster Club or supervises or staff supervises. That is also a rec commission policy. We'll not be setting that policy. There's been discussion that by reducing the subsidy, we will be damaging our rec program by raising fees in this coming year about an average of about 4.5%, reducing the subsidy by $175,000. You know, this is the first time I've understood that you get better product when you subsidize it than when you pay for it. If that were the case, I'd say subsidized housing is better than private housing. I don't believe in that. I look at it this way in a market economy. If the adults who participate in that swim team are saying they like their swim program subsidized because we're charging them $100 for the program and it costs a city $105, not including the pool, not including the chemicals, that we should be subsidizing that program, I don't understand it. I think we're furnishing with a subsidy of furnishing the pool and furnishing a $450,000 subsidy. That's a generous subsidy to the program, and I think we need to look at what programs actually cost, and the user should be paying those fees, particularly in the adult field. We're subsidizing adults, we're subsidizing seniors, and we're subsidizing children. I don't believe subsidy is a good program in the long run to the extent that we're subsidizing our programs. So I support reducing the subsidy. I have been asking this question for 14 years. The question has been dodged for years. Mr. Fleck asked, why did we move the program over to participation fee? So we could identify what the true costs were. We found out last year the true cost of the recreation program, which was a subsidy of around $1 million. I'm asking to reduce that. Joe was gracious enough to eliminate 2 vacant positions, which reduced some of that subsidy. I moved some indirect cost out of that program to lower what it showed up as subsidy. I'm asking this council to support a reduction of another $179,000. Whether there's further reductions is up to this council in the future. But I don't understand why we're having to subsidize folks in our adult swim program. I don't understand why we cannot, people who have people in a program cannot afford to pay the true cost of that program. To the extent we have children that cannot afford a program, that their families have a financial difficulty, I think we need to subsidize those children. But in my neighborhood, I'm subsidizing my neighbors who live in $1 million houses for their children to participate in the program. It's a wonderful program, but I don't think that's the purpose of government, to subsidize programs that folks can afford. So I would ask this council to reduce the subsidy from $500-something thousand to $400-something thousand. Any further discussion? Councilmember DiPolito.
Mr. Mayor, one of your comments about it should be market-driven, I agree with that to a certain extent. However, there are programs within recreation and parks that wouldn't exist unless the government was involved, because there are certain things where there's low participation, and it would be very difficult for a private group to offer those services. And if they did provide them, it wouldn't be something that individual citizens could afford. So I think there is a function within the city government to help provide educational experiences for our children, for our adults, for our seniors, for everyone, that they couldn't necessarily afford or that couldn't be offered within the marketplace. So I think there is an opportunity for that. And we don't have all of the individual line items and all of the individual detail to discuss here tonight, but I trust our Rec Commission is doing a good job of keeping an eye on those items and making sure that we're offering programs that are important to the city. And there have been many people who have said that the Rec and Parks program is why they came here. That's why people want to live here. And there are programs that can be self-sufficient. Our lacrosse program seems to be extremely self-sufficient, as they have pointed out. But there are some things that wouldn't exist without, and I think those are vital to our community. I think they provide educational experiences for our children, and I support our Rec and Parks Department. I support this motion.
Councilmember Orleans.
Mr. Mayor, I don't necessarily disagree with you. And we've talked about some of the subsidies for certain areas, such as children or maybe seniors. And I think there's been some issues about which plans or which participation fees would go up, which ones wouldn't, some average of 4%, some going up 20%. So I'm willing to hold off on it until we have a meeting with the Rec Commission with the stipulation that it occur very soon and that we address this issue. So I'm willing to, back off it at this point, but I think we need to address it. I think we need to move forward in that direction, and I would stipulate that meeting that the Rec Commission would like to have with the council occur as soon as possible, and then, these funds may stay or may not stay during the budget year.
Further discussion? For the record, I've been after this for 14 years. I hope we do it soon if this council votes to defer it once again. All last year I asked for this meeting, never got it. Not gotten a justification of why we're continuing to subsidize some programs more than others. I believe that giving folks a field, giving them a gym, paying for the lights, that's a subsidy. I believe $450,000 is still a substantial subsidy. But I think we need to wean ourselves from the paying for programs that our citizens don't believe are worth of what actually costs, but we have to subsidize them to present these programs. Councilmember DiPolito has said there's some programs that we wouldn't exist unless we subsidize them. I don't know what those programs are. I don't see why I just don't understand why we're having to pay for programs that our citizens don't believe are worth what they cost. Councilmember Eichelhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of points in addition to what I've said. Well, first of all, what we're looking at a scheduling meeting is June the 22nd, I believe, which is about 3 weeks from now, to have this discussion. And I agree, we should have this discussion. We should have had this discussion. And believe it or not, I actually agree with the mayor's point that programs should be self-sufficient. And I've always actually supported fees increasing if that needed to happen. However, in probably an interesting irony, by making me the liaison to the Rec Commission, I've learned more about the recreation program and have actually changed some of my thinking in terms of how it impacts what happens in the city. And as Mr. DiPolito said, so many people, I would say a majority of people you talk to say they come to Roswell for the programs that are available here, both parks and rec and all those things together. And that is an economic development driver. It is a property value driver, increaser. And if we're going to be subsidizing a bike race for $25,000 for middle-aged men in spandex that ride $12,000 bikes, that's an economic development spur. Why can't we also help children who live here, some of whom may not be able to afford the participation. But the key, someone asked a point earlier that, are they, if cost increase, is that not covering it? Every year, every program does increase cost if that program's specific direct cost has increased. So bats cost more, whatever you want to say, elements cost more. That program has increased whatever amount that would be, which is a minute, per individual cost. What we're talking about now is making a change of philosophy and covering a cost that has never been covered before by the participation fund. Again, that's a philosophical discussion I think needs to be had and needs to be decided upon, and part of that very well may come into the cost in the future. And as a warning to folks, I may support some increase based on that. But that is a different thing than just saying the cost has increased over time. This is a totally different approach. And that needs to be addressed and discussed between all the folks. And I agree with the mayor. We should have had that discussion. We need to have it now. So that's where I come back on all this. So, right now it's 179. The right number is 479 plus 179. I don't know that number, but at this point, I want to hold off on that and see where that goes.
I suggest if you want to hold off on the budget, let's hold off on the budget. Let's not pass the budget piecemeal. You don't want to pass the budget on the TV because you're saying we can discuss it later. Now you want to discuss this later and pass it now. I don't understand it. Any further discussion? All in favor of Councilmember Eichelhart's motion to restore $179,000 to the rec participation subsidy, raise your hands. Councilmember Orleans, Eichelhart, Wynn, DiPolito, and Diamond. All opposed? Price is 4. That's unanimous. All right. The second motion is let's put Mr. Orland's list back on the screen so we can have a full discussion.
That this recent amendment that we just passed changes the amount of $347,000 towards road resurfacing from $347,000 down to $168,000.
That's correct. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. All right. We'll open it up for discussion by council of these proposed additions to the budget. Councilmember Price.
Just procedurally, not to be hung up on procedure, but sometimes it's helpful. Road resurfacing. Now, over the years, and I've not been involved that many years, but actually just one previous budget cycle, but in our policy book, it says that road resurfacing is a capital expense. Now, I know that when the millage rate was restored, when questioned, Councilmember Orland said, okay, we'll put it in road resurfacing. However, according to our budget policy book, which we have been given, and it's in front of us, I think it's page 24, whatever, it says that road resurfacing will be taken up as part of the capital budget. Now, I think we all know that, a road is not something you can kind of buy and depreciate, et cetera. It's part of ongoing maintenance. But I hate to see us putting it in both budgets. We're budgeting it here in the operating budget, and then, as I see, we're going to be voting later to also put some monies from the capital budget. Is it useful to put it in one place and leave it there, or do we need this sort of flexibility?
I think what we're trying to program right now is the current year revenue. We have $100,000 in current year revenue. And I'm asking this council to program that $100,000, and I think that's the exercise. Now, $100 million, not $100,000. I'm just a little bit off. So we've got $100 million, which we're asking, which the council is programming. The next discussion will be spending money from reserves, and I think that's appropriate to take up separately. So I think if you look at it not as a capital budget or as an operating budget, but as a budgeting current year revenues is what the exercise we're doing right now, and then we will entertain motions as to
expenditures from reserves I'll take a break after we take this vote.
Well, I guess my question, I'm sorry to interrupt, but, I mean, what is the categorization of road resurfacing, and which budget does it come out of, and why would we put one amount in this budget and a different amount in the other budget? I just would like some clarification as to where road resurfacing should be.
Well, obviously I failed. I'll let Kay try it.
All right.
Kay, if you'll first we get Kay's response, and then we'll hear from the council.
Councilmember Price, the policy of the categorization is certainly up to this council. There are accounting definitions of infrastructure and capital, and what the city has been faced with in the past is many years ago we had road resurfacing was considered maintenance and road reconstruction was considered capital. And what we ran into is when we were doing projects and the way we get contracts, work with the contractor, and when we get LARP money to help supplement what the city pays for road resurfacing, we get in there and things on the ground are very different than what we think. And what we think is a road resurfacing, we get in there and somehow the road bed has been compromised, and suddenly it becomes a road reconstruction. Therefore, it's a different pot of money. At the end of the day, it's all the revenue that has come into the city that we have to allocate. So in our wisdom of taking up way too much time on senseless accounting measures, when bottom line the road needs to be fixed, whether it's a resurfacing or a reconstruction, the council at that time combined the pots of money to say road reconstruction and road resurfacing. As those numbers have increased over the years, we have not had enough money in the maintenance side of the house in the operating budget to cover what was needed to be on a 20 to 25 year resurfacing program. Therefore, we have used capital funds that have been in reserve. It has been this council's practice to appropriate capital out of reserves. It's not a requirement, it's just been our policy. That money is in the pot and can be appropriated for anything that the council deems appropriate, including operating expenses. It's just how it happens to be segregated. So we can come up with a policy and there can be a definition, but bottom line it can be appropriated between both pots of money, out of one only, or only on the capital side, out of reserve. That's completely up to the council.
Yes, Councilmember Diamond.
Since this is one of my bandwagons, I'll throw it in again. I feel very strongly that road resurfacing and repair is a basic city service and should be in the maintenance and operating budget. And we've been doing it out of capital because we could, and it qualifies. And, you know, there were very good reasons for doing that. But as anybody can tell, we have $12 million in our capital budget. It's not going to last forever. We're not adding to it like we were at one time. And if you take $2 million out of it every year, forgetting everything else, you know you're coming to an end. So what I think a number of us, I know I won't speak for everybody, but I feel like we're making a step here to start to move that into operating. So, you know, would it be neater to put it all in there? Absolutely. If we had $2 million to throw in there, I would do it. But this is a step in that direction, so I'm hopeful that it will continue as we go along.
I have a different take on this. Keith, would you put up how much our surplus is from year to year in the past years? This is a record of is that the record just showing what the surplus was each year? I'm not sure that's the graph that shows it went from 8 to up to 4 in the last couple of years. That's the one I'm looking for. Cumulative. This is cumulative. I'm looking for what the subsidy is each year by year. Keith, would you explain to the audience what this shows?
This particular graph does not take into account the capital activity that takes place in the general fund. So it's the revenue over operating expenditures, absent any capital activity such as road resurfacing or vehicle replacement.
So if we take the operating budget every year, and we take it, what does it cost us to operate versus what's left over at the end of the year? We've never had less than $4 million left over at the end of the year. So I'm anticipating $2 to $3 million this year. That's why I believe we've got sufficient money to pay for road resurfacing and give our taxpayers a $500,000 rollback, because every year we have a subsidy. Every year for the 13 plus years I've been mayor, we've had a subsidy. So yes, if we spend $22 million on a road, we can spend it down on a new intersection, we can spend it down pretty quickly. But if we're talking about maintaining where we currently stand, we're not spending down our reserves because of road resurfacing every year, taking out of capital. If we spend $8 million on capital this year, we'll spend it down. But if we just covering road resurfacing, we've got more than enough to cover road resurfacing every year, year after year, from the prior year's subsidy. Other comments? Councilmember Orleans.
I think back to Councilman Price's question is, over the history we've had, as Kay was outlining, we've had road resurfacing in the regular operations budget. We've had it in one-time capital maintenance budgets. When our budgets got a little pinched, it kept getting moved around and moved out, and we ended up using our capital budget out of reserves to cover road resurfacing. And then one of the things that I heard from many people this year was that we need to get that $2 million back into the operating budget as best we can going forward in the future. So an attempt was made this year to get a good part of it back into the operations, maintenance, capital, whatever you want to call it, but into the operations budget for this year. And as you can see, we are still going to have to take money and add to it through the capital budget. But again, in the future, it's going to be an attempt to try to get that into the operations, maintenance, one-time maintenance capital budget.
Further discussion. My last comment before we vote on this budget, I hope this council will reconsider the $500,000 rollback. I've understood from this council they need that money. We can't afford a tax break. We've got $26 million in reserves in the bank. We're expecting a $4 million surplus this year. If I look at my citizens, I say, who can best afford the $500,000? Can the city get by without it? Absolutely. Can my citizens get by with it? Well, they can too. They can tighten their belt. But I think with the increase in revenues from last year of originally projected, if I kept the millage rate, it was about $1.5 million. With the rollback, I still had $750,000 additional revenues this year. I thought that was a good, that the city could use some of that and we could give our taxpayers a break. I'm disappointed this council is not willing to give our taxpayers a break, and this council believes they need the money more than our taxpayers do. So I'm disappointed in this council. Any further comments? Yes, Councilmember Price.
Are we taking this line by line or as a total motion?
There's an amendment. We'll be voting on the amendment to the budget, and that will be the final vote. If you'd like to discuss it line by line, you have this opportunity.
Which amendment will we be voting on?
Councilman Orland's amendment.
Well, it's a motion, actually.
It's a motion to pass the budget with his amendments, as amended by Councilmember Eichelhardt.
Well, I have two questions. One, Councilmember Orland just said there's been an effort this year to get the road resurfacing back into the operating budget. All I can see is there's an addition of $347,000. The only reason there's an additional $500,000 in there was because the rest of council rejected the millage rate rollback. So that $500,000 wouldn't have been there except that the millage rate rollback was not approved. So all I see really is an addition of $347,000 into the operating budget. And I think if there is being an effort to put road resurfacing back into the operating budget and they want $2 million, $347,000 is not anywhere close to moving in that direction. So I would think that perhaps there would be some other ways to get that in there if there was a real will to do that. My second question is, as Councilmember Orland has presented this add-delete list, I'm assuming that he's assuming responsibility for the 3 deletions that are on there and the additions, unless any other members of council wish to share in his folly.
The vote will show that. I do have one question. On the assistant chief of police position, it has never been explained to me why we need to add one more person to the management of our police department. So at this time, I'd like to hear that presentation. I'd like to hear from our chief of police. I presume that's his department. I know that I haven't, currently the police department seems to be functioning very well without that assistant, and I'd like to see our justification why we need an assistant.
May I give the background, please?
I'm not worried about what happened in the past. I'm worried about going forward, and that is, why do we need this position? I understand that there were some discussions in the past, but the question is not what happened in the past. The question is, do we need an assistant police chief today? And that's what I need to hear. And if your comments address that question, I'm open to it. But I want to hear from the chief, because I presume he's supporting this, and I want to hear from the man who says we need this position. Because I haven't heard this yet.
Yes, sir. As when I came here, one of the first things I was told was I need to assess the current organizational structure of the police department. What I did was I formed a committee of officers in a cross-section of the police department to come together, and we reorganized it, the form to meet the function from what had been done previously. They used to have 2 majors. One ran half of the department, the other one ran the second half. What we've done is reorganize that in such that we're converting what was a major's position into a chief's position. There are no more additional people. We're just reconfiguring that structure. And essentially we were having one person who would be responsible for the organization when I was not there, and also could take on some of the responsibilities in which I'm doing now that should be done by a major.
Would you tell me what those responsibilities are that he will be taking on?
It's going to be maintaining supervision of some of the day-to-day affairs. Also, when I'm out of town for a meeting like this, or if I'm on vacation, he would be the person, would be the go-to person in the organization to be in charge.
Well, that's when you're out of town, but I presume you're in town most of the time.
I'm in town most of the time,
and
but
you
there's
work
also
very hard, and I appreciate that. I'm trying to figure out what other duties he performs, because I'm hiring a full-time person to take care of. If it's just the times you're out of town,
no, sir,
that's not a full justification. I need to hear the rest of the story.
No, sir. It is the structure in which we reorganized. Basically, that person will be maintaining the day-to-day affairs. It also allows me to get out into the community and start working in the community with people. I've not been able to do that because I've been focused on doing day-to-day operation activities, and use that person, and I can start focusing on the vision of the organization and where we're going in 6 months, 3 months, a year from now, as opposed to getting involved in day-to-day activities, and that person can make sure those things are done as well.
Right. Explain to me what the organizational chart would look like after this. Who's reporting to you after this person's added?
We'll have 4 people reporting directly to me. The jail administrator, I have an administrative assistant, the assistant chief, and then professional standards, which makes up the people that select the accreditation, internal affairs, handling citizen complaints. Under the assistant chief would be 3 operational divisions, which would be support services, which includes everything that's not a uniform or a detective. A second division will be a uniform division, which is made up of 4 different groups. The 3 watch commanders, which are morning, day, and evening watch, as well as special police services, which are the traffic unit and crime suppression. And then the third division will be in detectives, which is a combination of everything from juvenile to intelligence to crimes against persons, crimes against property.
Has that structure been approved by council?
We presented it at work session about a month ago.
Has it been approved by council and by vote?
I believe it was, yes.
Well, now, did we take a vote at the committee meeting? Yes.
The organizational structure is not approved by the council. That's an operational issue. What the council approves are full-time equivalent positions. Those have not changed. Department directors in any time may reorganize their structure. We have had a lot of discussions about citywide organizational structure. If you recall, back in the fall when we did the mid-year budget adjustment, the police department was a part of that, and the old structure used to have 2 majors answering to the chief. During the restructuring, we eliminated a major's position due to the early out program, and on that slide we had assistant police chief to be determined upon the arrival of a new police chief when the organization would be reassessed. So the number of FTEs that the mayor and council approve would not be changing. It's just that we eliminated a major and we're replacing that with a assistant police chief. That position must be approved by this council. That's what's on the floor right now. As it relates to functions changing around, just like changing shifts or moving captains around, that's up to the police chief as it would be in any other department director based on our current policy.
Just a question. Now, I've met with you once a month since you've been here. Is there a reason this hasn't been brought to me prior to tonight?
It was brought to you in our update meeting. He had the
I keep
organizational
minutes on
chart.
these meetings, Ms. Love, and I don't recall a discussion of this position or why we needed it.
We might not have discussed in depth or why we needed it, but it has been in our staff request of budget when we went over the budget with you. It has also been part of Chief of Works' update to you when he's talked about he put the committee together about restructuring.
I understand we discussed he put a committee together, but I never received a report back as to what that committee was recommending.
He presented the org chart in our meeting, in our update meeting. I'll have to go back on my calendar and look at the date. But he gave the org chart. We did not have a detailed discussion. I apologize, Ms. Love. I do not recall that. I do keep detailed minutes of these meetings, and I'm disappointed that this has come forward without having the title of Chief Executive Officer of this city. I'm disappointed that wasn't brought to me earlier.
Pay attention.
Mr. Aguilar, I do pay attention. I have monthly meetings with my department heads for this exact purpose, and I'm disappointed that this wasn't brought to my attention. Thank you, Chief, for that presentation.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Diamond.
Chief, can I ask you one more question? Sorry. Can you clarify, because a lot of this is succession management related, and can you explain in the next 2 to 3 years what we're looking at in leadership retirements?
I'm looking at right now about 25% of my department, my command staff can walk out the door tonight. I'm looking at a third can leave in the next 3 to 5 years. And so what we're developing as part of the budget this next year is a very comprehensive approach of succession management where we do assessment centers for developmental purposes along with behaviorally based interviews and a review of their training and some 360-degree evaluations for people who are interested in being sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. And with that, we'll come up with a plan to help them have us a plan in the next 3 years of a feeder pool of highly qualified candidates. So like most organizations, public and private, you're not choosing the lesser of two evils. You're choosing amongst several well-qualified people. So one of the things that's going to allow me to do is one of the things I'm really good at is planning and future and oriented, like this other person to go out and do the day-to-day operations of just running the police department on day-to-day, that I can push us to the future of where we need to be and helping develop those leaders.
Thank you.
Any further discussion before we take a vote? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. The motion, let's repeat the motion. The motion is to add the items shown on this fiscal year 2012 proposed budget of June 1st, 2001, add delete list. With one change, and that change would be the road resurfacing fund is reduced by $179,000, and there is a new item included which would be increasing the subsidy to the rec participation fund by $179,000. Is that accurate, Mr. Eichelhart?
I would say so.
Okay.
Maybe divide the question.
Ask your question, please.
So may we divide the question, take it line by line?
If you'd like to take it line by line, certainly. All right, we'll take it line by line at the request of Mrs. Price. All in support of the Fund Assistant Police Chief position, raise your hand.
Excuse me, Mayor, there's one motion on the floor.
Councilmember Eichelhart, I'm presiding officer. I'm taking this line by line.
I'm not Eichelhart.
Councilmember Orleans, I'm taking it line by line.
One motion on the floor for one vote. We have discussion all day, Mr. Mayor, but there's one item on the floor for a vote. You can discuss each item, but there's no vote on each item. There's
Mr.
one
Orleans,
motion
we're going to vote on
and
each
one
item.
vote.
You're out of order.
You're out of order, sir.
No, sir, you're out of order. I'm presiding officer.
By the attorney's ruling, though, I think he would say that the council can vote to determine what the order will be. Would that be correct, Mr. Halsey?
If you've done it before, but he's the presiding officer and he's making the rules.
We'll be voting on line by line. All in favor of adding the Fund Assistant Police Chief position, raise their hands.
Excuse me, Mr. Halsey, I have a question. How can we have separate votes when there's only one motion on the floor?
The mayor has said he wants to do it that way. We're going to have to consider your motion as a whole. After you get through, you're going to have to vote on the whole thing. So the mayor's just adding work, but he can do that.
Without any motions on the items?
No, the motion is there, and all of these items are within that motion. And as I understand, Ms. Price's thing was to divide it and to vote on each line separately, and the mayor has said, all right, we'll do that. And that's part of the motion.
Anyone have a
Thank you, sir.
Taking a break, Councilmember Eichelhart. That shows a lack of respect for this office, and I'm taking a break. We'll resume at 10 o'clock. Of the motion as a separate item. All in favor of funding the Assistant Chief Police, raise their hands. And I'll read the number, $114,004. That's unanimous. All in favor of funding the operating contingency of $150,542, raise their hands. That's all in favor with the exception of Councilmember Price. Are you opposed, Councilmember Price? Yes. Councilmember Price is opposed to that number. All in support of funding additional road resurfacing, and I understand the revised number is $668,000. All in favor, raise their hands. That's unanimous with the exception of Councilmember Price. Councilmember Price, how are you voting? Councilmember is voting. That's 1 against, 5 in favor. That's
To the deletions.
well, we've got another addition here. The deletions. Yeah, we'll get to the deletions in a minute.
What was the amount on that, please?
The road resurfacing was $668,000. All in favor of increasing the revenue, the rec participation fund by $179,000, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. All in favor of deleting the video cameras for mayor and city council meetings, $18,000. All in favor of deleting that, raise their hands. That's 5 in favor. All opposed. Councilmember Price, are you opposed?
Well, I would prefer to take it as a matter of the original budget, but if you require an opposition, I'll vote that way.
I don't require opposition. I'm just wondering how you're voting on this 18. I've got 5 votes in favor of deleting the 18.
It's really not an add deletion as much as it's a vote in opposition to the proposed budget, correct?
This is what I'm asking you to vote on.
Go ahead.
Do you support deleting the $18,000? I have 5 folks who support deleting the $18,000, and you join in support.
No, against.
Councilmember Price is opposed to deleting the $18,000. All in favor of deleting the $12,000, please raise their hands. That's 5 in favor, with Councilmember Price being opposed. All in favor of deleting the $10,000 from the special events budget? All in favor of that, raise their hands. That's 5 in favor. Councilmember Price opposed. So, have we voted on all the separate items? For the general fund. For the other funds, all in favor of the $468,000 for the group, adding that to the group benefits fund total. All in favor of that? That's unanimous. All in favor of funding 2 911 dispatchers for $69,029. That is unanimous. Councilmember Price, are you voting? That's unanimous. In favor. Stormwater maintenance operations contracting fund for $166,000. All in favor of that item?
A question?
Yes.
Is this related to the stormwater utility fee, or is this separate?
Do we have an answer?
It is part of the stormwater utility fund. It will be supported by the fees brought in on the revenue side. This is maintenance and operations of us contracting that out by use of contracts that we have in place for engineering services. It's in lieu of hiring positions, hiring people.
I have 5 votes in favor. Councilmember Price, how are you voting?
In favor. That's
Unanimous. Any other items which we have not covered? Mr. Halsey, are you saying that we should now take a vote on all the items as a whole?
Well, you haven't voted on the motion which included this, so you need to have the motion to adopt the budget.
Do we have a motion to...
No, you've got to vote on the motion that was already made.
We have a motion to adopt the budget. All in favor of the motion to adopt the budget with the proposed add-delete list with the change of road resurfacing to $668,000 and increasing $179,000 for the rec participation. All in favor of that motion? That is Councilmember Orleans, Eichelhart, Wynn, Dippolito, and Diamond. All opposed? Councilmember Price, how are you voting?
I'm abstaining. I'm on record with the previous division.
Abstaining on that vote, she'll go with the record. So the motion passes 5 votes with 1 abstention, with the clarification Councilmember Price offered. Councilmember Orleans.
Next motion, I'd like to move to appropriate $6,038,700 for one-time capital from general fund reserves and $1,500,000 from impact fee funds for the relocation of fire station number 4 as presented on the overhead screen.
Do we have a second to that motion? Is there a second? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I'm assuming Councilmember Orleans would have to clarify that first amount, since we are taking that $847,000 down.
Yes, I'm sorry. That amount is now $1,321,000.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I would ask the council consider deferring this until the next meeting.
Mayor, can you turn on your mic, please?
I would ask the council consider deferring this until the second meeting. This is the first time the public has been made aware of a $6 million change to the budget. It's a substantial change. I think waiting until the last minute is to add $6,217,000 to the budget without prior notice to the citizens is not the right thing to do. We've had several budget meetings. I've asked council at each budget meeting for their requested additions to the budget. I have not heard from any council member until tonight on these requested capital projects that make up $6.2 million. At the last council meeting, you voted to approve the budget without bringing this $6.2 million. If I was proposing a budget tonight and I sprang $6.2 million on this council would cry foul and say, wait a minute, we need time to consider this. The citizens of Roswell deserve no less. They deserve this council giving them notice of this $6.2 million in changes and the opportunity to respond. And I asked, it's now past 10 o'clock, and I ask that you defer voting on this until you've got the citizens have received notice of your proposing to add $6.2 million to the budget, and that you give them the opportunity to comment and not bring it up at 10 o'clock. It may not be the 12th hour, it may not be the 11th, but it's the 10th hour, and I think you should defer this vote. Councilmember Orleans.
Actually, unlike the .11 mil reduction that you sprang on us at the last meeting that we never had any discussion on, we have had multiple work sessions, budget discussions on the capital budget. We had an exercise of blue dot, red dot, green dots on what the priorities were for the different items. It has been pared down from an original request of $8,295,000 down to the current level of $6 million. So it's not something new for you, sir, and it hasn't been sprung on you.
Councilmember Orleans, this is the first night that anyone on the council has proposed a capital budget. There have been capital projects discussed. That's not the same as proposing a budget. This is the first night that you or anyone else has proposed a budget of $6.2 million without giving the citizens, this is the first time they've heard that you're proposing to $6.2 million. And I've heard about this, yes. I've heard it discussed, but the citizens haven't. And I'm asking that you respect the citizens and give them a notice of what you're proposing and give them the opportunity to comment before you take a vote. I assume that your respect for the citizens is level with your respect for me, and I appreciate that. All right.
I've respected your position. I've respected the citizens. This is a continuation of our capital budget that's carried forward year after year after year. So they've also been discussed in the past. So we just disagree, Chair.
Councilmember Owens, I actually support all the budget proposals that are on here with possible exception of one. What I disagree with is the process of presenting something at the 10th hour without notifying the citizens in advance. All right, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion before we open it up to the public. Councilmember Eichelhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You may be surprised that I don't totally disagree with you on it. One of my concerns, and I've said this for years, is that we don't have the long-term plan of exactly where all of our capital money needs to be spent. We have ideas, but we haven't laid that out, and I am concerned that we're whittling away at some of that money without that long-term plan. Having said that, I think all of the things on here, except for one I'll get to in a second, are things that we will likely be doing. So I'm generally okay with that. However, I do hope that, again, we will lay out a plan that shows, because we have at least $100 million in needs at this point, to determine what those things will be done, when they will be paid for, and how they'll be paid for, rather than whittling away as we go. Now, I will actually agree with Ms. Ahmed on the one part of that. We have $26 million that I think is too much that we're holding on to. Having said that, though, we have well over $100 million that needs to be spent. So I think it's time to start doing that for some of our needs. Now, having said that, there's one element in the impact fee fund for $350,000 for Mansell extension. We as a council have, at least most of us, had said we're not certain on that project. I'm still yet to be convinced that this is a project that needs to go forward. I'm sure Steve, he always has had that desire, and there may be a time during this year where GDOT comes back and says, well, we're actually willing to pay for all that, and this may make sense. But I'm not to that point yet. I would ask that we do, and would make a motion that we pull this out for now, It will remain in the impact fee fund, and as I understand, there's not really anything right now to be paid for anyway. So ultimately, we may end up doing it, but I'm uncomfortable doing that given the fact that we're not supported it as a council at this point. So that would be my motion to remove that from this proposed capital list.
Just so I'm clear, Councilman Aguilar, you're asking to remove from the current budget, capital budget, which item?
The Mansell extension design, which is $350,000.
All right. Do we have a complete list of what Councilman Orleans is proposing?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, may I clarify?
I'll add deletions.
This is additional of one-time capital on page 248 of the proposed budget.
Can we put something up on the screen that shows all
Yes,
this?
sir. That was in there. It's not an ad. It is in the budget that was just adopted.
All right, so it's already been adopted.
It's in those numbers.
Wait, this is the capital part.
This, all that's on there, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, is not the impact fee budget part of all the fund numbers that was read in the budget ordinance of the second reading?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
This number is included in that?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay. So that budget just got adopted. Now, obviously, you can make a change to that budget.
Councilman Eichelhardt, that would require another vote to amend the budget we've just passed.
That's why I asked the question early on about what's capital and what's operating.
And this is one-time capital that is on the add delete list.
All right.
Coming from reserves.
Let me see if I'll field the questions from council, and then we'll deal with this issue. Councilmember DiPolito.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Eichelhardt and I talked about this earlier, and we thought this was going to come up now. But I would like for Steve Asenbrack to come forward, if he could, and just elaborate a little bit on the subject and why it is coming up now. And I understand there have been concerns about funding this.
Before we get to the question of the specific issue, Councilman DiPolito, I don't want to sidetrack this, but as I understand it, this is really not a related amendment to Councilman Orland's budget because he's proposing a capital budget. It would be an amendment to the original budget that you just passed.
That appears to be the case.
So the later it gets, the more easily we're confused. So I would prefer to discuss Councilmember Orland's proposed capital budget and then come back to this issue separately so we don't, we'll address it, but I think it's best addressed separately because it's a separate issues.
Fair enough. Thank you.
All right, so what I want to get back to is we have passed a budget, and now Councilmember Orland's, as I understand it, is asking to pass a capital budget to be funded from reserves. Is that fair, Councilman Orland's?
Correct.
And your motion included all of these projects shown on the June 1, 2011 capital budget, which is before us.
Correct.
So what we're discussing now, Council, are these projects. Now, if you want to add to these projects, that would be an amendment. But if you want to amend the budget we just passed, let's hold off on that until we address this capital budget and vote on it. Other discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
are you entertaining other additions and deletions?
Yes, as to this
At this
capital
time?
budget. Not amendments to the budget we just passed, but as far as additional items that weren't previously passed, we're considering additional capital projects.
Well, I'm wanting to clarify if we will, vote this line by line, and if you want all proposed additions and deletions to be considered at this time.
Well, Councilman Orleans made a motion, and we have a second, to adopt all of these things on this page with an amendment to the citywide resurfacing. That's the only change from this page. Is that fair, Councilman Orleans?
Correct. Just changing the number on that one.
So if there's anything you wish to delete from this
I'd like to
list,
offer
or you
amendment.
want to add to capital projects, now's the time to do it.
I'd like to amend by addition, and I believe Mr. Lee has that page he can put up.
Do you have a page that's going to come up, Keith? And this is in the, all right, where are we here? Capital Projects Fund?
Correct. Ignore the stuff above the line.
All right. So, Councilmember Price, given that this is your list, you want to go over this, explain this to council?
Well, I guess I'm still in a quandary as to where the other list came from.
Well, it was presented by Councilman Orleans and seconded.
So is that the only other additions or deletions from council?
So far on the floor, that's the only other additions. If you make a motion and there is a second, we'll have other items to discuss. But at this time...
well, is the presumption that the first list that Mr. Orleans presented, is that a representation of the rest of council besides me?
You'll have to address that question to Councilman Orleans.
Do I have permission to ask him that question?
You have permission to ask him that question.
Councilmember Orleans, is this add and delete list a fair representation of the majority of council?
I asked everybody for input on the Capital Projects Fund. Received the input, and I don't remember exactly who from where on each item, but then put this together based on the input that I got.
So it's fair to say that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 supporters.
I think Councilman Orleans thinks he's got the support to pass it. At this time, Councilmember Price, if there's anything you wish to motion to delete any of these items or add additional items, Councilman Orleans, your floor is yours.
I would say, just let me clarify. Input I got from asking all council members, and also going back with the department heads and discussing the items and making sure these were items that, one, were needed, two, could be done this year. So it's really from multiple different sources that it's come together.
Mr. Lee, Mr. Mayor, may I ask Mr. Lee a question?
Sure.
Mr. Lee, did you bring the dot list with you by any chance?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Thank you. As in going through the capital requests or the discussions for capital projects over the last few months, and we have not, I wouldn't say we've had a good discussion or meeting of the minds on prioritization, although we had a rather rapid exercise at one point where we put dots on projects we thought were a good idea or not. This was after the departments had prioritized their requests. So I noticed that some of these items that are now appearing in this ad list seem to have had like no dots. So
now we're talking about Councilman Orleans' ad list.
Correct, the ad list. The initial ad list that is in the motion had no dots, and apparently at that time no support. And some of them were rather low in priority from the department. So that's why one of the items that I've added as a request for an adding is the State Road 9 ATMS. And that's mainly because I get so many complaints from citizens about the timing of the lights.
Well, let's go back to your ad list, because I think you're talking about your ad list.
Okay.
Keith, you can pull up Councilmember Price's
Okay,
ad. So you're asking to add the State Route 9 ATMS.
Correct. And that's, as I say, based on our DOT exercise and the prioritization of the department, which prioritized it higher than the dump truck and the motor grader. And the dump truck and the motor grader are close to more than $300,000. They were at a lower priority from the department. They received no dots, so therefore I'm suggesting that it might be more appropriate to take a higher prioritized item from the department that also had no dots, but it would save us a couple $100,000, and it would give us an item that would be more recognized from our citizens to have. Now, if Mr. Orleans has more information or from the department that would say that this is not appropriate at this time, I'm happy to entertain that.
Yeah, it was one of the items that was on there. I had a discussion with Mr. Eisenbrack about it. Again, I talked to a lot of people, compiled a lot of information, so I don't remember in detail on it. But from what I do remember, he indicated it would either not be accomplished in the next year or could wait for future years to do it. So, Mr. Aisbeck, if you want to comment on our discussion, you may remember it better than I do since I was talking to multiple people.
Yes, sir. The item is the State Route 9 ATMS, Automated Traffic Management System. What is going on with that system is, as you probably know, we've been under design and we are going finally with construction to synchronize all of the signals along State Route 9, which is a joint venture with Sandy Springs and Alpharetta. So it exceeds our boundaries in this case. Sandy Springs is the proponent, and we are supporting them as a sister city along with Alpharetta. The issue, and that is now fully funded, and that is under construction. And it's taken a long time for Federal Highway to finally approve the SCOOT system, which is a proprietary system for the adaptive controls. It's probably way too late to go into too much of that detail. Suffice to say that the backbone, the synchronization of the signals is underway along State Route 9. This item was an anticipation that not only is that program going to be successful, but as Councilmember Price mentioned, we do get a lot of issues about signal timing. This was to take the spine and actually branch it out into some of the feeder streets. Since we were really lost a year with Federal Highway and their research on the adaptive control systems, the chances that that even the State Route 9 backbone is going to be online this year is going to be very aggressive. So we're working very hard to get the State Route 9 system on board. And it's our opinion that this item, while it is important, can wait until that system is fully deployed into our system and the bugs have worked out, and we believe that it could wait for another year.
So
Thank you, Mr. Esselman.
So you're saying that the State Route 9 ATMS and adjacent SCOOT system is, your priority is to go with the dump truck and the motor grader before you go to the ATMS system?
Yes, sir. And that's really just a function of different things that change every day, every week, every month in our life.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Price, we're hearing from you on your items that you wish to add or delete.
Yes, there was an item that sort of disappeared, or maybe somebody can tell me where I can find it. The city municipal complex landscaping, had been requested in the amount of $30,000. Did that get approved in the earlier budget, or did it did disappear? Okay, I'd like to make it reappear by putting that back in, and that would also include, with that landscaping behind us here in the yard, the possibility of a labyrinth, which has been discussed with, I believe it's Independence High School or one of the high schools.
Now, I understand they want to do that at their cost, the labyrinth.
It may require some prep work, and probably not $30,000, but some combination of that with the trees.
Just for clarification, what do you believe this $30,000 is going to cover?
The initial request by Mr. Glover, and possibly some prep work to help them get it going.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When the department requested that, the $30,000 was an estimate or placeholder for the potential of several things happening in the back of City Hall. As you know, we've been looking at tree removal, connectivity between here and Canton Street. So Mr. Glover placed an estimate for basically tree removal for the items that city staff would not be able to take care of, pending selection of said trees to be removed, if any at all. So that was what the money was originally placed in there for. So that number might not be right for labyrinth / Councilmember Price, the items that you want to add for that.
Yes, Councilmember DiPolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to add that I know the Transportation Department has engaged a design firm to move forward with the sidewalk, and as part of that, we're looking at the connectivity to City Hall. So I would support putting the money in here for the tree removal I don't know anything about the labyrinth, so I couldn't support that at this time, but I certainly would support the tree removal and associated landscaping with the paths that we're putting to get from Canton Street to City Hall.
Do we have an estimate of what that might cost? What Mr. DiPolito is suggesting? Is 30,000 high or low, or is it just a ballpark number? Ballpark. All right. Councilmember Orleans.
Again, in conversations with Mr. Glover on the department, the original intent of the 30,000 was taking out trees that they have pretty well finished doing, and there wasn't a need for this money. Now, if you're getting into talking about something new or something different, that's another topic. But again, Mr. Glover indicated to me that he did not need this $30,000 in this particular budget year for the original landscaping purpose we discussed.
Councilmember Price, why don't we get a motion on this item so we know exactly what you're proposing?
I'm just going on discussions with Mr. Glover regarding the 30,000 that was in there before. At that time, I thought it was staying in the budget, and that he indicated to me that this could be also used for the labyrinth. So I'm just going on previous discussions.
I'm trying to find out tonight, do you have a motion to add money for landscaping the municipal complex and what you're anticipating it would cover, and how much money you want to put with that, so this council would be in a position to either support or reject your proposal? I'm trying to get a specific proposal if you have one.
Well, until very recently, I didn't notice it had been pulled out of the budget. It had been in there. It had been in discussion at several committee meetings. I'm surprised that Mr. DiPolito doesn't recall that, but it's come up at numerous meetings. And Mr. Glover was asked on several occasions also to discuss that further with the school to see what our financial obligation would be. So I don't have any precise details at this point other than the fact that it was in the budget and it disappeared, and I'm just trying to bring it back so we can figure out what to do with it.
So you're really looking at more of a placeholder?
I guess we could say that at this time.
All right. Do you have a motion?
Yeah, would move to add that amount.
You would move to add $30,000 in for landscaping, the details to be determined later. Is that your motion?
Yes.
Is there a second? Councilmember DiPolito seconds it. Let's go ahead to trying to keep on target. Let's have a discussion of this. And then I'm going to open it up for the public once I get all these motions. But I want to hear we have a motion to second. Any further discussion before we move to the next item? We're not going to take a vote until we actually hear from the public.
Correct.
Yes, Councilman DiPolito.
I would like to hear from Mr. Glover to find out exactly what he needs and how much he needs.
Yes, sir. Mr. Glover, if you'll come forward.
We originally put the $30,000 in mainly as a placeholder when we were going through the process of trying to decide what trees were going to be removed. Our staff removed a lot of the very small trees that were back there in the back between here and Highway 9. We removed a lot of those, did a lot of the underbrush, and as we did that, it appeared that it opened up a lot more than what we had anticipated. There are trees out there that could be removed, but I think, especially after this past Memorial Day, when we were all looking out there and a lot of the council members were there, we discussed that we were taking away too much shade. Everybody was crammed into the shade, and nobody wanted to sit into the bright sun on a 90-degree day. So it kind of determined itself that we need to leave as many trees in there as possible. We've underbrushed in the back. We've cleared out a lot. There's probably still some trees that need to be removed. Not necessarily maybe because they're damaged or diseased or dying or they're tearing up the sidewalk. But whether we need the full $30,000 or not is still questionable. Again, we attempted to have all the council go to the back, and we put some dots on the trees ourselves to look at those, see which ones be removed, and we never really got a real good consensus on what to do at that time. Councilmember Price brought up the fact of a labyrinth, which came forward from the school itself. Our landscape architect, Jay Reisinger, has been working with that school to do that, and they would be doing most of that at their own cost. I don't think we would have to put any money into that labyrinth at this time.
Mr. DiPolito discussed the sidewalk system to connect our parking a little more conveniently with Canton Street. Is that also part of your concern?
Yes, I was wondering if that was part of it, because we have been looking at that connection, and I know there's additional trails we're thinking about putting in there. If this money could go toward that additional trail and maybe whatever minimal grading and clearing, I think that would be a good use for the funds.
The original $30,000 could have been used, or still could be used, for the lighting. The lighting is not really sufficient at this time to walk from Canton Street back to the parking lot over here. Is fairly dark and does need improvements. So the $30,000 was kind of a catch-all. It could have been used for a lot of different purposes. Lighting and additional sidewalk would fall in that same category.
Yes, Councilman Orleans. Councilman Price. Councilmember Price.
Yeah, going back to some ongoing discussions about making that, a better connection with the Canton Street area. I know there have been some designs and some discussion, because if you try to walk across the street, you end up against that fence, and you have to crawl around it. And we know there's a problem, and we've known it's a problem for a long time. If $30,000 will get us on our way to getting that cow fence down and getting a path through there that we can get out of, I'm just sorry that this had disappeared from the budget. So I'm just trying to.
You have a motion and a second, so it hasn't.
No, I know, but I'm saying if I hadn't noticed that it was missing, this whole idea of fixing this area appeared to have died somehow. So I would just like to make sure that it stays in there as a placeholder for whatever improvements go in this general area, up to and including a labyrinth, path, lights, etc.
All right. We have a motion and a second. I'm suggesting to council that I want to hear from the public, but rather than doing it motion by motion, I'm going to try to get all these motions on the table that have a second and go to discussion. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before we go to the next motion? Yes, Councilman Orleans.
I just wanted to clarify from Mr. DiPolito, Councilman DiPolito. I thought the sidewalk connection and the walkway across the street was going to be all done through transportation when and if a plan was put forward, or am I not remembering that properly?
Yeah, the sidewalks will be done through transportation, but once you get onto the City Hall grounds, getting from the City Hall grounds to the parking area, that is not part of it.
Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Price, we have a motion for City Hall landscaping to add $30,000 in. You've heard from Mr. Asenbrack on the ATMS and the dump truck and the motor grader. Do you wish to make a motion regarding those, or are you comfortable with Councilman Orland's motion?
If we vote line by line, we don't need to discuss those now.
All right. Big Creek Bridge Road, it appears you wish to eliminate, how much do we have in the budget for that planning? $1.4 million for planning for the Big Creek Bridge. You're proposing to eliminate that. Is that a motion?
My concern, the motion is either we approve the project in concept or not, and maybe it has been part of a long-range plan, but is by virtue of approving the design indicating approval for the project.
I would hope that we would have a comfort level with the project before we spend $1.4 million to vote on it. I don't think so. The council could further discuss this, because there will be a contract would have to be let, but I would hope that if the council is committed, if they're voting tonight, that's a pretty good sign of commitment. So, yes, I think this would indicate the council is comfortable with if they approve it tonight. Now, I would tell the council that as opposed to the operating budget, which needs to be voted on because that ties to your millage rate and your funding, capital budgets can be approved and amended anytime during the year because you're working off reserve funds. So anyway, is there a motion to delete that, recognizing that's not?
I move that we defer or delete the request for $1.4 million in design money until such time as council has approved the project.
Well, all these deletions are really just in deferrals in essence because council can always bring them up later. The question is you're asking that it not be improved in this budget at this time.
Yes, I'm asking for a deferral for the design money until such time as we approve the project.
You bring it up later, not bringing it up now. We have a motion to delete the Big Creek design from this capital budget. It can be brought up later. Is there a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. Eves Road multi-use path and bike lanes design. You want to explain that to us?
My concern there is just the amount of money being expended, $275,000 for design, and I know it must be much more complicated than it would seem on the surface. But I wondered if instead of deleting it, if we could appropriate a smaller amount.
Perhaps it's appropriate to hear from our transportation department. He's the one who has proposed this number, and he can justify it.
Just to review, that project goes from Eves Road from Riverside up to State Route 140 Holcomb Bridge Road, and it will be a complete street, which means it will have travel lanes, bike lanes, and sidewalks and multi-use path. We consider it one of the 4 primary routes, the 2 primary routes on the east side and 2 primary routes on the west side. This is one of the primary routes where people get to the river, and it's heavily used. Our staff has reviewed the 275, and we're very comfortable with that number. If you wanted to reduce the funding, we would probably then have to do something like break it into phases. Right now, that mile-long corridor would be let as one contract. If you would like us to say do a northern half and a southern half, we could probably do something like that. Although having a bike trail that starts in one portion and goes that ends is not typically what we like to do. So it will be very hard to do that.
Did you say it's 1 mile of road?
About 1 mile, Eves Road.
You know, as a bicycle rider, I'd like to comment on this one. I'd like to see a multi-use path and bike lanes on this trip, but it would not be my highest priority in Roswell or even on the east side. I know as a cyclist, I'm comfortable on that road right now. Whether I'm climbing the hill or going back down the hill, that's not one of the streets I'm nervous about. I can't speak for the folks who are walking because I'm usually cycling that. I know that when it comes to bike paths and multi-use paths, I would put a much higher priority on Old Alabama and Holcomb Bridge Road, where you cannot bicycle on either one of those roads right now safely, and we've got a lot of traffic on Holcomb Bridge Road and a lot of traffic on Old Alabama, and I would set a higher priority on completing sidewalks on Holcomb Bridge Road and completing sidewalks on Old Alabama. That's not to say I don't support this project. I just wouldn't give it the same priority. Councilmember DiPolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Asenbrack and I have talked about this a little bit, and one of the other things, aside from cycling, is it's just a good connection because it connects the park to the school to the river.
Right.
So you're essentially connecting 2 parks with a school in between. So there's a lot of flexible use with the schools being able to get to the park, to get to the river, the neighborhoods being able to get to the river, to the parks, to the school. I mean, there's just a lot of uses for it from both a pedestrian and a cycling standpoint. And it's a fast-moving road. If somebody's driving down that road, they're going probably way too fast, right, just because of the topography.
Again, I support the project. I just wouldn't give it as high a priority as other ones. Councilmember Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Asenbrack, when I was transportation liaison, we had talked numerous times ad nauseum about sidewalks on Old Alabama. Because, I live over there, and the only way I can ride my bike is to put it in my car and drive it to somewhere so I could go ride my bike. That's a problem, but I think one of the reasons that we did not pursue that was because of any pending designs from GDOT that we don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully, it's not going to be widened, but we still don't know what they're going to do, and that is a state route. So even though I have empathy for anybody that lives on Old Alabama and doesn't have the sidewalks, I would hate to put in sidewalks. And we talked about topography also. Spend $1 million or so, a couple of $1 million to put in sidewalks, and then they're going to have to be ripped out.
Right.
So again, I agree with what the mayor says about Old Alabama and Holcomb Bridge, but in the long run, I think if we're going to do this, we need to connect our schools to our parks, to our rivers, and hopefully in the next decade, we'll be able to find out what they're going to do with Old Alabama so we can have those sidewalks down there. And I would be the first one to say, hurrah, finally we get something done on Old Alabama.
All right. Do we have a motion on Eves Road multi-use path and bike lane?
Not a motion. I was going to make
question.
I was just going to make a comment that what Councilman Wynn said, we had looked at Old Alabama, and there's other issues of not doing it up there currently. And this actually fills in a big gap, and I believe completes a trail all the way from Horseshoe Bend down through the river and all the way across to Cobb County. So it's like a major fill-in for that entire trail for the people, pedestrian, running, whatever. And it's been a project for quite a while that we've been trying to finish up. So going forward with it.
Just a question. Design for the whole project, what, $250,000?
$275, man.
What do we think the project cost will be?
Generally, design is about 10 to 15% of the overall project cost.
$2 million more.
Yes, sir.
The council, getting back to what Ken is saying, if you're committing to this, you're committing not to $250,000, but you're committing to $2.5 million. And I support the project. I just know, setting aside Old Alabama, recognizing the issues there, I would set Holcomb Bridge as a higher priority, given the number of people I see walking along Holcomb Bridge Road. And that's a judgment call. It's a matter of priorities.
Mr. Mayor, can I just, Holcomb Bridge real quick, because we are doing a Holcomb Bridge corridor study.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I correct? And that is including what we can do for pedestrian and alternative modes of
Going
transportation.
east-west.
Going east-west.
Across Georgia 400.
Exactly.
It wouldn't go all the way down to Eves Road.
But it would go from Warsaw down to Holcomb Woods Parkway, and that would give us a start on what we want to do on Holcomb Woods. Holcomb Bridge.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm trying to see if we have a motion and a second. Do we have a motion to revise this Eves Road multi-use path proposal? Currently it's $250,000. There's a motion to $270. Currently at $275. Is there a motion to change that in any way?
If Mr. Eisenbrack says it can't be designed for less, I'm still not sure I understand why this project would be selected over the others, such as the Green Loop. I know that it's not been added in this year, although it was a high priority.
This is a part of the Orange Loop, I believe. This is one of the major spines. I didn't bring that graphic with me, but this is actually on our bike loop. I could have written it down that way.
And you think it's going to take $275,000 to design that?
I certainly hope so after this conversation.
No motion at this time.
All right. Now you've got State Route 9 at 120. Do not fund. Do you want to tell us how much was that in the budget for?
Well, that amount doesn't seem to be there.
$200,000.
That's $200,000. That's at the square.
construction.
And that's rounding the corner at the square where we're having trouble with trucks hitting the wall. And do you wish to explain your position there before you make a motion?
Yeah, my position regarding that is that I hate to see the square made smaller. I hate to see the removal of the tree unless there's been some decision that the tree could be spared. That was my main concern, was the tree and this making the square smaller. That the modifications with that little
Truck apron.
Well, the truck apron and the little triangle, the pedestrian.
The pedestrian refuge, that's correct. Reshaping that. So we shave off about 40 square feet where the pecan tree is, and we add about 228 square feet. So there's a net add to the square.
You're actually increasing the square footage.
Yes,
of the
sir.
square. What happens?
But
to
it's
the tree?
impervious surface, right?
Well, it's impervious now. It's just going to guide the trucks away from the wall. And our plan is to hire a tree surgeon like what we did for the roundabout, which is to prepare the root systems and fertilize it to try to keep the pecan tree. That's our position, and we've been successful at that so far. It's hard to say whether that pecan tree is in good health now, but our plan was to try to save it.
No motion at this time. The next item is the Historic Gateway Master Plan, and it is in the add-delete budget for $80,000, and I'm increasing that to $100,000.
All right. You wish to make a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Yes, Councilmember DiPolito.
I would just like to ask a question. I know we originally talked about this, and I support it. It was at $75,000 originally. We've increased that to $80,000. I'm just curious why we need to go to $100,000. I certainly support it at $80,000.
Councilmember Price, you wish to respond? Why do you believe it needs to be increased from 80 to 100?
Well, I thought it might be a negotiating tool, but it doesn't look like I have any negotiating opportunities. So I'll withdraw that motion.
Let me comment on that particular project while we're on it. Although I believe we ultimately need a master plan for that gateway, I'm always reluctant to proceed with master plans until there is a consensus of this council on what exactly we want to do. And I don't think this council has reached a consensus. I try to pay attention, I honestly do, on this subject. And I would suggest that because this is a capital budget and because we can add this at a later time, that we wait until we reach a consensus on what we want to do and an idea of the scope of what we want to do, and then pass this budget amendment at mid-year or once we reach that consensus, because I'm always reluctant to approve plans and then go to the planner and say, well, we want a plan, but we don't know what we want. We've never had a very satisfactory result in that. So I'm suggesting on this item that we not, as Councilmember Price said, defer it. Not eliminate it for all times, but not pass it at this time. And so that's not a motion. I'm just suggesting when we get to that vote on that item, that's where I'd like to see us go. Councilmember DiPolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to call on Steve Asenbrack once again just to give a little bit of feedback, because I know this ties into the Historic Gateway project. So from a timing standpoint, we need to be sensitive to that as well.
The Gateway project is going along very, very well. We've had remarkable turnout from the public and remarkable feedback from them. We are about to turn the corner now from gathering of all the information to beginning of the alternatives design. And I can say that probably around September you will begin to see some of the feedback from the design professionals about some alternatives in that area. And then we can begin to have the discussions about what that would look like. So early fall is when you'll be getting some hard alignment options And that will still take many months to refine and to go through, but it certainly things are beginning to will begin to take shape after the summer, say early fall.
So from a timing standpoint, to start working on a master plan or a land use plan, when would be the appropriate time for us to start working on that?
Probably after the first of the year. Once the council starts seeing something that they like on paper, and I think as the mayor says, once we start getting consensus on an alignment, we've ruled out a bunch of things, we've ruled in some things, and we're beginning to gel, then I think it'd be more appropriate to start looking at overlaying that master plan on top of that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Councilmember Price.
Just the point you make that it would be within this budget year.
Could be.
Yes, so just we could take it up at a different point in time, or we could have a placeholder for it now. But my concern is that sometimes transportation activities parallel, but maybe are not in sync with overall planning for an area. So that's why I would love to see that planner working with you during this time frame, so that we don't build a road to nowhere, whatever, that is not suiting all the needs of the surrounding areas. So if you think it could be useful in this budget year, I would suggest and move that we leave it in the ad list as proposed by Councilmember Orleans.
Well, that wouldn't be you're not changing his motion, so that we don't need a motion on that. All right. So.
One more.
Yes.
Sorry. I'll try again. Since this is a capital budget, a nice capital expenditure would be a TV camera. Now that we're in the capital budget, so I'm sorry, nothing for Mr. Haselmack. Motion for $18,000 for a TV camera.
There's a motion to add that'd be 2 TV cameras for $18,000. Is there a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. Does any other council members have any projects they would like to add or delete from the list of capital projects which we have discussed? Before we go to the original, before I leave Councilmember Price's, I apologize, it's getting late. I was paying attention, but my memory's failing. What motions, if any, did we pass of Councilmember Price's? Did we get a second on? I think we got a second on one. 30,000. We have a City Hall landscaping project for 30,000, a motion and a second, and as my understanding, we don't have any other motions and we don't have any other seconds. So let's turn to Councilmember Orland's add-delete list, or ad list. So what we're discussing now would be this list of what's the revised amount? 6,217,000. Is that
217?
6,217,000 plus 30,000. So it'd be $6,417,700.
$6,247,700.
247. That's the total list of projects which we're discussing tonight. Does any other council members have anything to add or delete before I open this up for public comment? Councilmember Eigelhart.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I swear, and I can challenge anybody to go back and figure it out. Our first motion, we said we would be voting for the operating budget and we'd come back for the capital budget.
Yes,
which
sir.
means not only the add and deletes, but the actual items in that budget to begin with. So I'm still confused as to how the Mansell extension is not, or it was voted for previously. But
we'll get to that after this.
So that was my question. So is this the point then to say to delete that?
No, we're not. That would have to amend the first motion that was passed with 5-1, and we'll come back to that after we deal with this.
We just said yes, that it is the capital is separate from the operating.
Well, Kay, you wish to respond?
Thank you, sir. And it's probably all semantics, sir, and I apologize, but the capital budget was related to the one-time capital coming from reserves. that was not in the mayor's proposed budget. We did adopt some capital in other funds besides general fund with the second reading of this budget ordinance, and maybe we should have clarified that, but when in the proposed budget document that was published, proposed by the mayor, did include some capital items in other funds besides general fund that he did include, and that was one of them.
So Councilman Arglehart will not be discussing amendment to the budget that was passed until after we get through this list, but we will have that tonight. All right, what I'm asking the council now, I have a list of capital projects, which was motion and a second for what you see before you, with an addition of a $30,000 item moved by Councilmember Price, second by Councilmember DiPolito. Any other items to which council, what I want to do is open it up for public comment, but before I do, I want to get the full list of items under consideration. Any other items to add or delete? This time we'll hear from the public. Does anyone wish to comment? Yes, come forward, please.
I hadn't intended to stay this late, but I think I've fallen into the rabbit hole listening to this conversation. First of all, just a few comments. A labyrinth? I don't think so. You people have been discussing all night about what's really, really, really important in this city, and a labyrinth isn't even on my radar. You want to do it, and you say the school across the street's going to fund it? Well, I was at the grand opening of that beautiful greenhouse they had last year, and I've peeked in lately, and there's nothing in there but empty dirt and pots. They haven't grown anything. What a waste. That is Fulton County taxpayer money across the street, literally pissed away. So why would we want Fulton County, which we all fill the coffers of, to build a labyrinth? A labyrinth? Please, folks. A labyrinth? Second, the Eves Road extension, 1 mile. I'm absolutely for it. If it costs $2 million, that's a lot less than we paid to fix Canton Street in the 80s, which we paid $1.2 million for a half a mile of road, and those were 80s dollars. So I don't know what you're quibbling about for $2 million for a 1 mile road that would be multimodal and connect, as we said, schools and rivers and parks. Get a grip, folks. Remember, I'm the one with the memory. 1.2 to fix Canton Street, a half a mile of road, 80s dollars. As far as the Mrs. Price, you don't want the funding of the corner of SR 9 and 120, where the trucks are already driving over the cement and breaking the curb. I live there. I see it.
That did not get a second, so it's not.
Well, I know, but I want her to understand that I'm listening, and that is a stupid thing to ask to be removed when
We'll be discussing tonight things that we have a motion.
Well, great. You asked for comments. I'm giving them to you, Jerry. We watched you slam the
Mr. Mayor, can we have some decorum in the room?
Okay, I'm sorry. It wasn't a stupid idea. It was just not very practical. Because the Historic Gateway Project, and I am one of the citizens on the Citizen Committee for the Historic Gateway Project that has given untold hours already to that committee, you cannot separate the square from the Historic Gateway development. And if you want to have the development from the square, and that corner's part of it, to the river, then you can't eliminate one of the most important safety things. Those huge semi-tractor trailers that turn that corner are already endangering lives because of the way that has been put together. That has to be done. As far as the Historic Gateway Development Committee goes, I've been on it. I give my time for free. I don't have to be beholden to anybody except I give my time. We have given, and as Mr. Asenbrack said, we are coming to great consensus, and we have had great meetings and good output from the public, input from the public, as well as from the citizens who care enough to give their free time to this city. Now, we probably are going to have a plan based on what they have told us in September of what everything they have organized and what they have seen people want and what people don't want. And at that point, they say the project should be implemented and completed in about 2 years. Just so you all know that. Because I've been at the meetings, and except for you, Mr. DiPolito, last month, or last meeting at the church, I don't believe I've seen anybody else there. Except Mr. Wood, Mayor Wood, you were the one at the...
I've been there, thank you. I've been there.
Okay, great. Well, you've each been to one. I've been to all of them. Thank you.
Who else wishes to comment? Yes, come forward, please.
Salma Ahmed, 365 Lumco Road. I just have one comment to make here. I have just huge issues with the lack of transparency in presenting this large of a capital improvements budget this late in the evening, the same evening that you all plan on voting on it. I would have really appreciated having the chance to review quite a few of these projects and know that you were going to vote on them tonight. Thank you.
Yes, sir, come forward.
Like Knight and 580 Indigo. I also would like to encourage taking a deep breath. This is a lot of money. I've been tracking this. I knew there was going to be something. I expected that the citizenry would have an opportunity to review it, understand, and provide comment. So I'd like to encourage a postponement on this part of the budget.
Anyone else wish to comment? Yes, sir, come forward.
Lee Fleck, Martin's Landing. Hopefully I won't take a lot of your time. Kay, I think you can probably help me more than anybody right now. Last week when I asked about the capital number that was on this budget here, this 6.4, I got the impression that you told me that 3.9 was operation budgets. Is that correct? Contained in that number was
2.9 is maintenance capital. That $6 million number that you showed on the pie chart is across all funds. The 2.9 is general fund maintenance capital number that I was referencing last week, I believe.
Okay, so that capital right there has absolutely nothing to do with one-time capital.
Correct. That doesn't have anything to do with this list, sir.
Okay, so this list that's come here tonight, I notice is most of the line items come from your unfunded capital list that's on the budget on the web page. So it's not anything new. It is available for anyone to see. It has been. I went and I tried to check everyone that were on that list, and they are on the unfunded list on the budget. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir. They are.
Okay.
They are on that list.
Okay. So, these are just. This was the wish list, and that's the pick and choose for $6 million. Now, what the bottom line I want to know is, if you vote on this $6 million, .2, what is going to happen to that $12.8 million reserves? Is it going to be reduced
it's
by
going to go
6
down.
point? Okay.
By
it's
that
going to be okay. So we're actually going to consume all of this that's on that list, on this list.
It would be appropriated, and then what actually got spent would be based on actual contract.
That's what I want to know. So we're going to go from 12.8 in excess reserves to 6 point. What's the bottom line, Keith? You're the numbers man. 6.6. So we're going to have 6.6 left over after tonight. Okay. The reason that's of interest to me is I want to make sure that we're going to make it to 2015 when the bond expires, so we have sufficient reserves to keep our AAA bond rating. That's, I've watched that for years, and we've been successful ever since 2007 when we had excess reserves of $40 million, and we had favorable variances along the way. I'm concerned that we're getting to the point where we may not make it to 2015. Remember I talked about that, Jerry, sometime back? In which we're going to have to go into reserves by policy if we're consuming the way we've consumed over the last 5 years, $6 to $7 million annually. We only got $6 million left, and we got 2 years to go. So you've locked yourself into a maximum usage of $3 million in capital for the next 2 years. You do understand that, I hope. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to comment? We'll close the public hearing. Does any council, we have two motions. Does anybody wish to break this down line by item, or do we want to take it by the motions? Councilmember Price.
Having heard several comments in the audience for potential deferral of this consideration, I just want to see if there's any sense among council that they are not prepared to vote for this evening.
Is that a request or a motion?
If it requires a motion, apparently previously we had discussions without motions, so I'm just asking, does anybody want to defer this?
I don't see anybody raising their hand. Any further discussion before we the question now to the council? Yes, Councilmember DiPolito.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to comment that, I understand the concern about this being a large sum of money, and it is. We've had numerous meetings and numerous discussions about these items. They are, as Mr. Fleck pointed out, in the unfunded capital, so they're items that have been in here, and during this process we do add and delete, and that's just part of how the process works. I didn't create the process, but I'm in it, so I'm for moving forward. Thank you.
For what it's worth, Councilmember Price, I would support a deferral for the reasons I said. I know they've always been unfunded, but that's a $100,000 list of unfunded projects, and it's not an indication to council to the citizens of how that we're going to spend $6.2 million. And I think in the interest of transparency and letting our citizens know what we're doing, we need to, before we spend $6.2 million, we should bring it up before 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night. And so I would, if I had the opportunity to vote, I would support a deferral. Any further discussion? Councilman Orleans.
I was just going to say that all of these items have to come back to council for approval to move forward. So they will all be discussed in much more detail when the item comes up for approval to move forward. And if they're not moved forward or they don't get to them this year, the money does not come out of the reserve. So, and this is, as Mr. Fleck pointed out, this has been on a capital budget list for several years, and we do have the next 3 years on our list now for anybody to see at any time. Thank you.
Any further discussion? The question is, I can vote on this one of two ways. I can either vote on Councilmember Price's amendment and then on the Councilmember Orland's amendment, or we can vote on it item by item. If I don't hear a request, we're going to vote on the two different amendments. All right, I hear no request. All in favor of the amendment to add $30,000 to the capital budget for landscaping as a placeholder, raise their hands. Councilmember Orland's, Price, Eigelhart, Wynn, DiPolito, and Diamond. All in favor of the add-delete list, which appears on the screen, for $6,217,700 plus the 30. All in favor of that motion, raise their hands. That's Councilmember Orland's, Eigelhart, Wynn, DiPolito, and Diamond. All opposed. Councilmember Price passes 5-1. Do we need to vote on have a second reading of the millage rate?
No. How about the impact fee fund? There's another.
The impact fee fund at the bottom of the screen.
All right.
That's what I was.
All right. Well, before we go there, we need to cover Councilmember Eigelhart's issue.
I'll tell you what, because I'm concerned about reopening the entire budget at this point. As I said before, I think there's not necessarily support amongst the entire council to move forward with this project. And if there does something come along from GDOT or whomever that we have an interest in moving that forward, then we might maybe spend that money. So wherever Steve went, I think it's very clear, I hope, amongst all of us, don't spend any of this money on this project until we
Be
have a
specific,
consensus.
which project we talking about?
The Mansell extension aspect, until we are clear that we all support that. Again, it doesn't really matter technically whether it still sits in the impact fee fund or it's in the impact fee fund, designated this, whatever. I'm okay with that. As long as there's the understanding that this is not saying move forward with that. And then we can just drop that for now.
All right. So, what's next? Do I need to vote on this impact fee total of $1.5 million?
Yes, sir.
That's an addition. Do we have a motion?
Actually, I included that in my original motion. So it's really already been voted on.
I wasn't. Let's vote on it again, just because I wasn't clear. For the record, I understood we voted from the $6,217,000. Is there a motion to also approve $1,500,000 of impact fees being spent to relocate, or let's just say for the fire station number 4 project, whether it's relocated or built on the current site, it's for that project.
Move for that approval of the impact
We have
fees.
a motion to approve $1,500,000 for new fire station number 4. Do we have a second? Second by Councilmember Diamond. Further discussion. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Passes unanimously. Do we need to have the second reading on the millage rate? Councilmember Orleans.
I have one more motion to clean up everything that we were talking about in the budget, and that is, we've had multiple discussions about competing cities having salary increases and the fact that we haven't had an increase in our employee salary for several years. And there was discussion about, as you saw in the charts earlier, the number of employees gone down and everybody trying to pitch in and help cut our budget. And we have not put anything into the 2012 budget. But I would like to move for approval to, at the mid-year budget adjustment we do in November, that based on what has happened in the current fiscal year, if the funds are available, that the one-time compensation be funded out of the 2011 carryover funds to be determined at our mid-year budget adjustment in November.
There is a motion. Is there a second? It's really just a motion to take a second look at this. It's not. It wouldn't be a binding motion to approve or not approve. It's a motion to take a second look. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
We have a motion by Councilman Orleans to take a second to look at a mid-year budget adjustment in, was that November?
I believe so. That's when we usually do the mid-year adjustments.
And to
finalize out of the 2011.
To take a second look at employee salaries. Is there a second?
Based on that
No, not
explanation,
salaries.
I will
It's just
second.
it's not
No,
salaries. It's a one-time stipend, not a salary.
Based on that explanation, I will second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any comments from the floor, discussion from the floor? Yes, sir, come forward.
One quick point. If you're going to give any type of increase to your employees, I hope you consider not doing it as a percentile, but equitably, so that the guy making $5 an hour gets as much as the person making $100,000 an hour. You know what I'm referring to, don't you? If you got $200,000 in excess funds, everybody gets an equal amount. You don't do it as a percentile of a salary. Does that make sense to y'all? Good. Thank you.
Any other comments from the floor? Any further discussion by council? Councilmember Eigelhart.
I'm confused as to why we're voting on this now as opposed to when the...
We're voting on it now because there is a motion on the floor with a second.
I get that, but why are we doing that now as opposed to when a mid-year budget?
It's really more of a
change?
non-binding resolution, but there's a motion on the floor with a second. That's why we're voting on it.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, my assumption is this is just to take a second look at this at mid-year. It is not binding anyone to do that, but it is giving us an opportunity to look at any excess or any additional funding.
The whole basis of it is that we've been asking our employees to really help in a lot of different areas and pick up slack and watch the budgets. This year is almost over, so the point is, if they've been successful and there's funds available out of the current 2011 budget, that we look at providing a one-time stipend at our mid-year budget adjustment if funds are available out of the 2011 budget.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, raise your hands. That's Councilmember Orleans, Eichelhart, Wynn, Dippolito, and Diamond. All opposed. Councilmember Price, are you voting? We haven't.
May I say why?
Certainly you may say why.
This was requested by staff. It was uniformly rejected by council in our maintenance, capital, and operating expense decisions. Therefore, this is disingenuous to pander to the employees to suggest that, yes, we do want to help you, but we really didn't put it in the budget because we didn't want to. So it seems like a push me, pull you, and I just don't want to be party to it, so I'm going to abstain.
Motion passes with a vote of 5 and with 1 abstention. Any other motions before we, Councilmember Price?
Yes, I believe we have to adjust our ordinance number 4 to reflect the total number of employees we've now authorized. So I believe it's 604.
Mrs. Love, would you wish to respond?
Yes, ma'am. All the adjustments that are made tonight will be corrected, and you will not be signing that ordinance tonight. We will get that to you at a later time, as we typically do with those changes. So all those numbers will be adjusted.
And the final employee number
would be 604.
Thank you.
Councilmember Orleans.
The final motion for the night is move for approval of the millage rate of 5.455 mils for the FY 2012 budget. And this will be the second reading.
Before we entertain a motion, I have been schooled to read the resolution before we entertain a motion.
Ordinance to adopt millage rate, whereas the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell, the governing authority of the City of Roswell. Now, therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell wish to establish a millage rate of 5.455. The millage rate has a component of 4.059 for the general fund, operating, and capital improvements budget, and a 1.396 mils component for servicing bonded indebtedness. The millage rate may require adjustment upon approval of a certified tax digest for the year 2011.
That is the first reading. Do we have a motion? Second reading. Do we have a motion?
So moved for approval.
Motion for approval by Councilman Orleans. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Diamond. Does anyone in the audience wish to comment? Further discussion by council. For the record, I do not support this millage rate. I believe the city could afford to reduce the millage rate by $500,000. I think it would be a strong gesture of sympathy for our taxpayers, and we still have lots of money to cover contingencies, to cover road resurfacing, to cover salary increases, and I think the city can afford to give our taxpayers a break. Having said that, any further discussion? All in favor of the motion? Councilmember Price. Is that a vote, or is that a wish to be recognized?
I just wondered if you're going to ask for council comment.
This is time for discussion before we take a vote. Yes, I'm asking for discussion by council.
I just want to restate my previous position in favor of the millage rate decrease, and it's confirmed in the response I've gotten from a number of citizens in the interim since the last vote, and I feel that I must stick with my original vote based on the response I've received. So I will not be supporting the raised millage rate over the proposed budget from the staff and mayor.
Further discussion by council. All in favor of the motion to approve the millage rate at, what was the millage rate again? 5.455, which is the same as last year's millage rate. Raise their hands. That's Councilmember Orleans, Eigelhart, Wynn, DiPolito, Diamond in favor, all opposed. Councilmember Price passes 5-1. Mr. Halsey, is there any further business to conduct tonight?
Not that I know of.
We're adjourned. And we did not go to midnight.